So first thing I'd like to do this morning is acknowledge our sponsors. So you are at an issues forum this morning that is sponsored by the Missoula Area Chamber of Commerce and our visionary sponsors for Securities Bank and Northwestern Energy. I'd like to acknowledge a few of the other sponsors that helped us put this on today. So I'd like to thank PayneWest Insurance. I'd like to thank Blue Cross Blue Shield of Montana, Crowley Fleck law firm, State of Montana, and the Office of the Commissioner of Securities and Insurance. Oops. Anderson, Zurmuehlen, being here. Donation to the facility, Missoula Federal Credit Union. And then tables are Cafe Dolce, Famous Dave's Barbecue, Einstein Brothers Bagels, Culligan Water, and Wanda, Coca-Cola Bottling, and Pepsi of Missoula. So our issues forums at the Chamber of Commerce are brought to us by members of the Chamber. And what they do is identify a concern out among the membership. And so the Affordable Care Act is an issue that was identified by a broad group of members. This is the largest attendance we've had. Usually it's about 50 or 60. We have about 100 here this morning. And I want to thank Walt Morrell from Morrell's Truck Stop because we weren't going to do a healthcare forum. And Walt put us in a hammerlock and convinced us it was a good thing. So thank you, Walt, for being gentle with us. We always appreciate that. Nice carrying away. Jim Decker, who's the chairman of the Chamber of Commerce, is with us today. Tom Stocking, a former chairman, is with us today. I'd like to acknowledge the staff. Kimberly is floating somewhere, put the whole thing on. Trail, who's our CEO, and Sam Sill. And Sam is our government affairs person. If you have any ideas for future forums, Sam has some forums. We'd love to put on another one. And Frank Kudia, who handles the financial stuff at the Chamber, is here today. And he's our debits left and credits right sort of guy. I'll tell you just a tiny bit about the Missoula Chamber. 733 members representing 27,000 employees. I want to talk to you about healthcare in Missoula a little bit. You think it's about employers and employees, and you think it's about insurance costs. If you looked at the top 20 employers in Missoula, you'd find out that 8 of those 20 deal with healthcare. The 2 hospitals are obvious, but there's other healthcare givers who are major employers in Missoula. What happens in the healthcare industry in Missoula just doesn't affect your industry or your employees as they become more responsible for their healthcare costs. It affects jobs in Missoula. So what we're talking about today is something that has 2 prongs of importance: how it affects your business, how it affects your employees, and how it affects the economy of Missoula. So welcome this morning. Our facilitator, Morgan, is with PayneWest Insurance. Morgan is, excuse me, a vice. See, that always happens, Morgan, when I go to introduce you.
Yeah.
Is a vice president and employee benefits consultant at PayneWest Insurance. Morgan has been serving clients in his current position since 2004 and is a licensed insurance agent and consultant specializing in large group health insurance. Since 2010, when the Patient Protection and Affordable Care Act was passed, Morgan had collaborated with insurance carriers, legal resources, and HR professionals to define the terms and conditions of the law and their impact on his clients. He firmly believes in the need for a proactive strategy when managing the changes that the law requires. Morgan is recognized as an expert in this field and works to develop benefit plans that meet the needs of his clients. Paid advertisement for you.
I'll slip you the money there.
Yeah, that's right. Thank you. All right, Collette Hanson, Blue Cross Blue Shield of Montana. Collette began her career with Blue Cross Blue Shield over 28 years ago, joining the company in 1984. She's responsible for sales and accounting management services for key fully insured clients and self-funded clients. Collette also leads the efforts of Blue Cross Blue Shield Strategic Marketing Services, which is responsible for developing the advertising and bonding strategies for Blue Cross Blue Shield. Colette's experience covers all aspects of the healthcare industry. She has served in a number of leadership roles, including strategic marketing services, membership claims, customer service, enrollment, and benefit configuration. Collette serves on the board of the Florence Crittenden Home and the Montana Business Assistance Connection. Legal, Sarah. Sarah's got a case this morning, and she's taking a deposition, I'm not sure, but we'll introduce her.
In about 5 minutes.
In about 5 minutes, we'll catch up with her. So, Sarah is an employee benefits attorney in the Helen office of Crowley Fleck. So you're in Missoula, you're in Bozeman, Billings, and Sarah is out of your Helen office. Her practice focuses on health, welfare, cafeteria, fringe benefit plans with over 15 years of experience in employee benefits. Mrs. Loble is a leading advisor for self-funded health plans. She regularly helps clients comply with RISA, COBRA, HIPAA, and the Montana Insurance Code, with the most recent emphasis being the rapidly developing healthcare reform areas. Kristy, how are you today?
I'm good, how are you?
So Kristy came over from Bozeman. I have a hard time saying that. Oh, no, look at here. Kristy, look at right next to you. Look at my back. There you go. An employee benefits attorney in the Bozeman office of Crowley Fleck. Excuse me again. Practices in all aspects of employee benefits law, having passed the CPA exam in 2002 and receiving a Master of Law, LLM, in taxation. In addition to her law degree, Ms. Buckley is uniquely qualified to guide clients to the numerous financial and tax aspects of employee benefits legal compliance. Mike? No silver or maroon in the closet this morning?
No, I took a grist at least.
All right. Mike has been a certified public accountant working with closely held businesses for 20 years. He is currently a shareholder and tax director of Hanson Zurmuehlen Company, PC, a regional CPA and business consulting firm. Mike is a member of the American Society of CPAs and the Montana Society of CPAs. His community volunteer work includes treasurer of Community Medical Center Foundation, treasurer of the Kiwanis Club of Missoula, and corporate chair of the Walk to Diabetes Club. All the way from Collette. How are you this morning, Christina? Nice to see you. So, state representation on the panel this morning is Christina Go of the Office of the Commissioner of Securities and Insurance. Christina joined the Montana Department of Insurance as an attorney in August of 1999 and is currently the general counsel for the department. Her job duties focus primarily on state and federal health insurance law and related health reform issues, privacy law, the regulation of insurance companies, and drafting legislation and administrative rules. Previously, Ms. Go worked at the Montana Attorney General's office. Let me see. Who was that? Okay. And Santa Clara County Public Defender's Office in San Jose, California. She is a member of the California State Bar, the Montana State Bar. She received a BA in History from Stanford University in California and a JD from Santa Clara University in California. She is currently the chair of the NAIC ERISA Working Group and was formerly the chair of the NAIC Market Analysis Procedures Working Group. Let's have a round of applause for our panel. All right, with that, I'll turn it over to Morgan. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Nick. My name's Morgan Hirschenberger. I typically don't need a microphone. Does everybody, can everybody hear me all right? Back? All right back there? Okay. I'm going to propose that we stand maybe when each of us are talking because we do have MCAT back there and so that they can see us, maybe we'd each stand as we're taking the floor. I'm going to be kind of guiding the presentation today. We did put together a pretty extensive slideshow because we had some stuff that we wanted to kind of guide the discussion through. We want to encourage you to ask questions. This is a discussion type of a format. The reason we have slides is to guide the discussion. This is not meant to be just a full presentation. So the way that we're going to go through this is I'm going to be basically bringing up different topics and then engaging different members of the panel in questions on those topics. But we encourage you, if you have any questions, please don't wait till the end. We will have some time set aside at the end as well for questions. But ask the questions as we're dealing with the different topics. We set aside 3 hours today. The presentation that we've got right now, if we went straight through it, it would take about an hour and a half. So we should have plenty of time to engage in questions, and we strongly encourage that. So I'd like to start with just proposing a goal for this presentation and this general forum, and that is that we want to provide attendees with accurate and objective information regarding the regulations that are upcoming with healthcare reform. So we're not going to get into a lot of the stuff that's already happened. There is a lot of stuff that's already happened. We're not going to get into that. What we're going to get into is some of the major changes that are coming about this year, and particularly how those changes impact insurance products and the employers and employees in the community. So that's going to be the basic goal of our presentation. Overview of our agenda. So we're going to deal with this information in basically 4 or 5 different categories. Number one, there's some regulations that all employers are going to be subject to. So we're going to deal with those first. Secondly, we're going to be dealing with how do I determine what size my organization is? Am I a large employer or am I a small employer? And we're going to talk about that. Third, we're going to talk about small group insurance specific laws. So there's some of these rules and regulations that apply only to group and small group specific information. And so what we're talking about there is the general definition is under 50 employees. Then we're going to talk about the insurance market itself. So what changes are going to be impacting the insurance carriers that do business in the Montana marketplace. And then finally, we're going to be talking about how these rules impact the individual citizens in Montana. So those are the general categories that we broke it up into. And we do encourage you, like I said, to ask any other questions that you have. What we haven't got into is a lot of the stuff that has to deal with, the changes to the hospitals, the quality of care measures, and some of those kinds of things. The whole panel here has expertise in tax and insurance, but not necessarily in running a medical facility there. So we're not going to get into that. We're also not going to get into Medicaid in great detail there, any of the Medicaid and the changes there. So jumping right into it, one of the first changes that we're going to be dealing with for all employers is some new disclosure requirements. So effective the 1st of this year, all employers effective October 1st of this year, all employers must provide what's called the notice of the availability of the exchange. So this is a general model notice that's now available that employers send out to tell their employees that there's this new insurance exchange marketplace that's up and running, and you may be eligible for coverage under it. There's a summary of benefits and coverage. This is a standardized document that's meant to explain how insurance policies work. The idea of this program is to standardize how we discuss medical insurance and how people understand their medical insurance policies. Right now, all insurance carriers come up with their own explanations and summaries of how these policies work. The idea of a summary of benefits and coverage is to give one format by which this information is communicated so people can become familiar with that format and they can understand their policies a little better. And then finally, we got the notice of patient protections. That's a notice, there's a variety of different patient protections that was required in the Affordable Care Act, and this is a notice that those protections are enforced. So again, these are model notices that are provided to you by the federal government, and they're just for distribution to employees. So, Kristy, did you have anything you wanted to add on the model notices then?
Actually, I think it's important to point out this notice here, the very first one that we have listed, just came out a couple weeks ago. And you're going to see that there are 2 versions. There's an A version and a B version, and there are a couple pages to them. If you're a small employer and you do not offer health insurance coverage to your employees, you'll have an abbreviated form, and it'll say that on the form. It'll say your employer information, and then it'll put out a notice that talks about the exchange and informs your employees that they do not have group health insurance through their employer. If you do offer health insurance to your employees, you'll fill out a more detailed form, and there are a couple pages. The first page talks about what that insurance looks like, the kinds of coverage that it has for those employees, and also gives them the notice that they're able to go out onto the exchange if they want to. It'll have some model disclosures that you have to use, and then some optional suggested language that you can use that can tailor it to your health plan. On the last page of the notice, where you actually are offering health insurance coverage to your employees, that entire last page has fine print at the very top that says optional and it's not numbered correctly. I think it starts at number 13 and goes to 16. All of those pieces are definitely optional, and you should talk with your advisors about whether it would be in your best interest or not to add that optional language on the last page. And if anybody's interested in seeing what those notices look like, I think I have copies with me here today.
And you can go on the website to
Yep, you can
download
the website.
Download the form to make sure you have it available.
Where from?
So,
What website?
yeah, hhs.gov has the form available.
You know what, should we do that, should we send out a link to the template forms? We'll send out a link to the template forms as a follow-up to this presentation. I think that that's pretty relevant information.
Because that's definitely an action step that all of you need to do.
And that's October 1 for current employees, and then if you have new hires, you need to do that within 14 days. We don't have good regulations to tell us what we mean by within, but let's say under 14 days.
And Kristy, does that notice, is it requiring them to tell their employees whether the coverage is affordable or offers minimum value?
It has some optional pieces that talk about.
That's the optional pieces, okay.
And some suggested coverage. Good question.
Okay, any
Is the exchange up yet in Montana?
exchange? We're
Is it up?
working with the federal exchange, and it's not ready.
When do you anticipate it being up?
Christina, do you want to?
Yeah, the federal exchange, I doubt that the website will be available for viewing until September. The plans are currently being evaluated actually by the insurance commissioner to determine whether they can be certified to sell on the exchange. That deadline isn't until July 31st, and then the exchange has to do a lot of stuff with those plans, agreements, and loading them onto the website, so that will take place in August. They haven't told us exactly when you would be able to view the website. I would suspect sometime in September, but open enrollment starts October 1 and goes through March 31st. That's in the individual market exchange. The shop exchange has rolling enrollments, so you can enroll at different times, but the same date, October 1.
And we'll be getting into the exchange in pretty good detail here later on in the presentation. Any other questions before we move along with this?
But I heard you say you're going to send out a template.
Yeah, we'll send a link to because there's a variety of different templates that you are going to be needing, and so we'll send a link to the federal website where they post those periodically as they're available. Okay, so the next requirements, again, these are for all employers. The first one is there's a limit on waiting periods. Waiting periods can no longer be longer than 90 days, so the waiting period for medical insurance coverage. So right now in Montana, you can have up to 365-day waiting period. So that means once Morgan gets hired into an eligible class, you can have him be in his waiting period for up to 365 days where I'm in an eligible class, but I'm not actually, I can't enroll in that coverage until I go through a 365-day waiting period. That's now limited by federal law. Federal law now says that waiting periods cannot exceed 90 days. Now, the way that the regulations are written right now, in medical insurance, we always use first of the month following language. What that means is Morgan will become eligible for his insurance the first of the month following his completion of the probationary period. Well, if you use a 90-day waiting period, you are in violation of the new federal regulation because that waiting period would exceed 90 days. So really, if we want to keep using first of the month following language, we would have to shorten that up to 60 days. The reason why we use first of the month following language is that if you don't have first of the month following language, if it says that Morgan's going to be effective upon his completion of his probationary period, if I come out of my probationary period on the 29th, guess what me and my employer get to pay for? A month's worth of premiums for 1 or 2 days worth of coverage. That's why we always use that first of the month following language. This creates a little bit of an issue. Now, I have heard some talk that CMS was reviewing this and thinking about possibly extending that. Have you heard anything about that, Christina?
No, and I'm pretty sure that 90 days is in the ACA, not in the regs. So I think it's unlikely, and I haven't heard that. No.
And the way it was defined in ACA was it cannot exceed 90 days, so it would be hard, in my opinion, I thought it would be hard for them to have any leeway on that.
Well, it's always possible they might come out with some kind of interpretation still. I'm not beyond the pale, they might do that. That it would be the first plan, could be the first of the month following the 90 days. But I haven't seen anything like that. Have you, Kristy?
No, I haven't. In March, we had some proposed regulations issued on a 90-day period, and they asked for comments to be submitted to take into consideration these things. But in the very beginning of that rule, they have quite a bit of discussion about how strictly they're interpreting it and how they understand that there are some things like these first of the month rules that they weren't planning on wavering from the 90-day period. So we haven't seen a final rule because they just collected comments 3 weeks ago, but they were pretty strict in the rule.
So that's going to be a substantial change. What I always want to be clear with my clients on is we are not changing your probationary period here, right? We're changing the waiting period by which you can, before you can be eligible for insurance coverage. A lot of people align that with their probationary period right now. A lot of employers that I work with, as long as you have a 90-day probationary period, you can align it. If you have a 180-day probationary period, which is quite typical in Montana, you're not going to be able to align your benefits eligibility with that. There are some exceptions for seasonal and part-time employees that I'm not going to get into right now. The seasonal and part-time employee issues are relatively complicated from business to business and need to be handled on kind of a case-by-case basis there, unless anybody wants to get into the detail on that right now. Leslie?
How, so using you as the example, and your 90 days is up on the 29th, and I know my insurance premiums start on the 1st, and I like to push the envelope a little bit. How is that tracked? And secondly, what's the fine for us as a small business if we wait those 2 extra days now on that 92 days?
You mean if you fudge people's data higher?
No, not if I fudge people's data higher, but if your 90 days is up on the 29th, I can go ahead and start your insurance anyways on the 1st.
Well, when you send that form in, it shows the data higher and that you have exceeded 90 days. Your insurance, this is actually a restriction on insurance carriers.
Okay.
Truly, this is not an actual employer regulation. This is something that's imposed on your insurance carriers. So your insurance carrier, yes, will be policing you on this. The only way by which you could, the only way you're going to get around this one is by fudging data higher, which is a big no-no. We call that insurance fraud. Collette, go ahead.
So yes, so based on the data higher, the
Yeah.
information that we receive, we'll calculate the 90 days or less,
That one.
and then we'll prorate
Okay.
whatever the premium needs to be per month.
Yeah, cool.
Because the language is actually in the insurance contract, and we look for it when we approve. We have to do prior approval on all insurance forms.
Is there anyone who's self-funded here, who has a self-funded plan?
Okay, so the next one is fully insured medical plans are prohibited from discriminating in favor of highly compensated employees. So what we're talking about here is Section 105 requirements that used to be just a small group, or excuse me, a self-funded regulation is now going to apply to fully insured products. Now, we don't know exactly how this interpretation is going to work, but what we can tell you is some of the practices that we've seen in Montana are going to change substantially. And Kristy's put together a couple of slides for you to explain the basics of what these requirements are about there.
So these will be some non-discrimination rules that are imposed actually under the Internal Revenue Code. And the rules state that if a benefit is provided to a highly compensated employee, then you must provide that benefit to all of your participants. Is this microphone working in the back?
Is this one recorded?
We can hear you just fine
Sorry.
without it.
This is a non-discrimination rule, and it says that if you're offering a benefit to highly compensated employees, you need to offer that same benefit to all of your participants. And what we see happening as a common trend in health insurance, a lot of times there's an employer share portion where highly compensated employees are their health insurance premiums are shared more heavily by the employer than other employees. And that's going to be something that we'll anticipate being addressed in the regulations. They were supposed to go into effect in the beginning of 2011, but right over Christmas, that 2010 year, we had some new regulations that came out and said that we did not have to comply with that until final regulations came out, and we still have not seen final regulations yet. But we should be watching for that, and I watch for that every time I open up my news, because you'll have to comply with it pretty quickly, and you'll have to be ready to move and act when it comes down. So what I would recommend, if you think that you have something that's discriminatory in your current plan, try to think about making changes now to even the playing field. And here are a couple of considerations to think about. And I've added in here penalties, and the text box went over it, but it's $100 a day for non-compliance. That's a pretty stiff penalty, and if you aren't flexible enough to act when the regulations come out, it could mean something pretty big for you. Normally, if there's a failure on non-discrimination, it just means that you pay that difference back, the amount that you've paid in extra to the highly compensated, but that's not going to be the framework here. It'll be a penalty. And is there another slide on this one, Morgan?
Oh, no, that was that. And so a lot of, what I run into, again, being a benefits agent and consultant, what I run into a lot is management carve-out plans. Now, most of the people in this group are under 50 employees eligible for coverage, and so will be regulated under Montana small group law. Right, so a management carve-out plan, to step back a second, is where you carve out a group of your employees and offer coverage only to a group of your employees. Right now, if you're a small group in Montana, you cannot do that. It's against state law. However, what we've run into is with a lot of associations. So there's different associations there with insurance carriers, and when you buy as part of an association, that regulates you under the large group law. And so what we've found is a lot of times these associations have been used by which to offer management carve-out policies in a small group setting. Once these 105 requirements go into effect, there is no more going to be a workaround like that. This is going to be a pretty straightforward situation that if you offer insurance, you're going to be offering the same benefits to those highly compensated employees to the very upper echelon of your organization as you do to the lower. Any questions on that? Yes?
Are there any rules for grandfathering existing plans?
Christina or
Okay, yeah, if your plan was issued before March 23rd, 2010, and so if you're an employer who had a plan that was issued before March 2010, then you could add employees to that plan and remain grandfathered. Now, some of the provisions of this law apply to grandfathered plans, but not a lot. A lot of them do not. So the other thing, there are triggers that cause you to lose grandfathered status, and that would be raising cost sharing above a certain level per year, or changing significant benefits would trigger a loss of grandfathered status. And I think we have...
There was originally, when these proposed regs came out, there was that grandfather.
yeah, and you
And
also
it's still there.
yeah, and you also have to look carefully about what your insurance. If you're fully insured in Montana, your insurance carrier very likely unilaterally changed you to a non-grandfathered platform.
There was less than 15% of plans that were grandfathered in 2011. Also, the association rules have been clarified by the federal government. They don't recognize associations consisting of small employers as a large group. They recognize them only as a small group unless they can prove that the association is a plan sponsor, which is a very difficult thing to do.
So when those changes were made with the employers that received the notice, and there's something challenging that?
Discuss that, Collette?
Yes, on the, I don't know if you can hear me through this. Can you hear me now? The small group within the state of Montana, I know Blue Cross and Blue Shield of Montana, we do not have any grandfathered plans in the small group arena, and less than 2% of our plans are still grandfathered, to the point that Christina made. If you made basically any change in deductible, it withdrew your grandfather status. So for the most part, within Montana, most of the plans are no longer grandfathered.
I have one self-insured plan that I work with that's still grandfathered, the rest of them are not grandfathered. Good.
And to go to the question, there was a grandfather notice that should have been sent out originally. Is that what you were asking?
Yeah, we had it within our information. If you became grandfathered, we put that information in your application that you sent.
And if you are grandfathered, you're required to send the same notice out with every description of your plan. So if, like Morgan, I have one client that has managed to retain grandfathered status, but every time they announce their plan or provide materials, they need to put a notice with it that announces to the employees that not every law applies to us because of this fact. So.
And if you don't know if you're grandfathered or not, you can just reach out to your carrier and they will let you know that as well.
Got one other question?
I'm looking at the discrimination rules on the highly compensated individuals. What is the rules about, say, for the highly compensated, the company pays all of their premiums, and on the lower compensated, it only pays state?
That's exactly what they're trying to stop.
Yeah, that would be discriminatory.
Can you repeat the question too?
Oh, the question was, if I got an employer who pays 100%, and I run into this a lot, got an employer who pays 100% of family premium for people that are taking accounting from CPA level and higher, and for people that are below CPA level, they pay 100% of employee-only premium, or let's say half of the employee-only premium. That would be discriminatory. That's the whole point, that's the whole idea behind 105, is that you don't pay different amounts for different people's coverage. They don't get different types of coverage. It's all for one for all. Now, you can discriminate against highly compensated employees, but I'm not in favor of that. So.
And just a finer point on that too, the non-discrimination rules actually are effective now. It's just that there's a non-enforcement policy that was adopted on those rules. So that means that the government will not enforce that $110 a day penalty on anyone until the rules are actually in effect. But arguably, a participant could sue, or there could be some other sort of claim or action based on non-discrimination. So I just want to emphasize that Kristy's point, to take action sooner rather than later. Because if you have an upset bunch of employees who feel that they're entitled to health insurance given these new laws and they don't have it, you might end up with a claim, and that's no fun.
If you've got a policy, program like this going right now, you want to start the conversation with the folks it's going to impact sooner than later, because they are not going to love this. Yep.
Does anything change towards 1099 contracted employees?
I'm going to pass that one to either Kristy or Christina.
Meaning independent contractors?
Yeah, just pay 1099 as opposed to W-2.
Nothing's changed, although that I know of. Although I do think that folks are taking a lot harder look at who their common law employees are right now, who their leased employees are, who their independent contractors are, because a variety of reasons, one of which being if you happen to have a lot of contract 1099 employees and they might take the position that they're actually W-2 employees, you could put yourself over the 50 employee limit and then be subject to the player pay penalties. And so that's something that some workforces who have a heavy amount of leased or contract are really taking a look at that, making sure that that's kind of locked down before they move ahead.
So be very careful of those because they are just cracking down.
Just real quick on 1099, that is a big issue with the IRS right now. Not working?
Hold it just a little closer.
A little closer, okay. So that's a big issue with the...
Just lean out, I think.
That is a big issue with the IRS right now. Like, they've already put in on your tax return, if you've noticed, the last 2 years, there's a specific question that says, are you required to issue 1099s and are you wishing it? So they're looking at that issue. So when it comes to health insurance, they're going to have that information. And if they're seeing a discrepancy in that, we bet it'll kick you into at least a look.
Okay, we'll move on to, that's pretty much it for the all employers part that we wanted to touch on. Now, determining large employer versus small employer status. We sent out a worksheet, actually Kimberly sent out a worksheet from Crowley Fleck put together that goes through so that you can do your own testing on how this works. I want to just touch base on the basics of how you determine whether or not you're a small or a large employer for purposes of the pay or play regulations. So for purposes, now the other thing that we're going to run into is when we start talking about how medical insurance is underwritten in Montana, those are different rules than what we're talking about here. We are talking about right now, for federal regulations, are you considered a large employer subject to the requirements to offer coverage, or are you considered a small employer exempt from those requirements? That's all we're talking about here because some other calculations change. They use different numbers, but we're just going to be specific here. So what we're looking at here is our full-time employees. So the first thing you do is take any employee who's considered full-time, regularly scheduled to work 30 or more hours a week. You count them nose for nose. So we got 40 people that are working that are regularly scheduled to work over 30 hours a week. Those are our full-time employees. Okay. Then we take all hours worked by our non-full-time employees. This is how we convert to FTE. So we take all hours worked by our non-full-time employees. Now we subtract out for any employee in that group that worked over 120 hours in that month, we subtract out any hours over 120 for that person. That way the person doesn't end up counting as more than one employee. And then we divide that number of hours by 120 hours in the month. You complete that calculation for each month during the year, and that tells you whether or not you are regulated as a large employer. If the sum of your full-time employees plus your full-time equivalents adds up to more than 50, then you're going to be considered a a large employer. Now, there is an exception for what they call a seasonal employer. A seasonal employer is an employer that ends up being a large employer for less than 120 days or 4 months in a calendar year. If you go over 50 employees, but you're over 50 employees for under 4 months, you are not considered a large employer. Take our resorts. That's really what we're talking about here in Montana mostly. We're talking about resorts, and we're talking about, okay, yeah, I'm a large employer, but only for 3 months during the year. The rest of the year, I've got 2 employees, me and my wife. We've got some ski areas and stuff that operate much similar to that. Those seasonal employers are not subject to large group requirements because they're a large group for under 1/3 of the year. Important to note here, those months do not need to be consecutive. If you're a large employer for May, June, July, August, so you hit your 4 month, but then in December you ramp up again for Christmas, that's going to be your 5th month. It's not 4 consecutive months, it's 4 months during the year. You can also choose to count days if you want to. They put in there that, okay, yeah, if you want to count how many employees you have on how many days, you can count each, 120 different days during the year. As long as you don't exceed 120 days during the year, then you're going to fall under the seasonal employer exception. And so that's one thing that it really does. I'm working with a couple of resorts right now that this really does apply to them. What they're going to have to do, they've got kind of a hiring pyramid, and they're going to need to make that into more of a tower, and they're going to be subject to the small employer requirements, and which makes a lot of sense because in a lot of cases you can substantially disrupt your employees' lives if they come on your coverage and then go off your coverage and then come on your coverage and go off your coverage. It's as disrupting for them as individuals as it is for you as a business owner. So that is an exception that's been provided within the regulations. And then the other big point that we want to bring up here is that if you have multiple groups, if you are an owner of multiple groups, commonly controlled and affiliated service organizations are considered to be one single employer. And Kristy's going to talk a little bit about, or does anybody have any questions on the calculation slide before we get into affiliated groups?
If you have employees that are ramping down into retirement that are Medicare eligible, do they still count in?
If they're an employee, yes, they count. Who doesn't count is, hopefully either Mike or maybe Kristy can speak better to this, but who doesn't count is people like S-Corp owners, controlling partners of an LLC, the actual ownership there. Do you have anything to add on those points there?
So that's pretty much right. You don't count the owners. If you're an S corporation, 2% owners.
Any other questions on the basics of the large group before Kristy talks about the affiliated and commonly controlled? Okay, we'll let her have fun with that.
I'm going to trick you. You think you came to the small employer session and I might tell you to go to the large one. Let me just have a showing of hands in the room for anybody who thinks you're in a company that might have a sister or brother company. You have owners that own multiple other kinds of companies. Can I see a showing of hands? I want to know how relevant this information is. Okay. So if you have some common ownership owners, you are going to have to aggregate your companies. And on the left side of the screen, I have the different kinds of groupings. And then on the right side of the screen, I have the different ways that you can group. So I first start with controlled groups. A controlled group is where you have multiple companies that are owned by the same owners, and they're all corporations. And I'm talking about C corporations or S corporations. And they're only corporations. You don't have any other kinds of entities in that structure. So let's say you have 10 corporations. They would fit under your controlled group rules. And you can pair up controlled group corporations in either a parent subsidiary format or a brother-sister format. The other group that I have here are controlled groups, the common controlled groups. And this is a more common category that we see in Montana because these are going to be groupings of other entity structures that are not just corporations. They're going to be LLCs, joint ventures. You could have nonprofit organizations. You can have S corporations and C corporations mixed with LLCs. So you're going to have a bigger mix. But again, we still have the parent-subsidiary relationships and the brother-sister relationships. And I'm going to start with this top part of the slide here because they all follow the same rules. If we're in a parent-subsidiary relationship, it means that we have two different tests. One test asks if the parent owns 80% of subs in the group, and the other part of the test asks if a sub is owned 80% by a parent. And so we think of that as an 80% test, and it goes each direction, as you can see. And if you have something like that, you probably have a parent-subsidiary grouping. A brother-sister pair is when you have common owners, and we have an 80% test and a 50% test. The 80% test looks at just regular ownership like you would think of it. Total common shares in a corporation or total voting common stock in a corporation, total membership interest in an LLC,
or sometimes we see a trust that's brought into the related entities, and there we're talking about maximum actuarial value of beneficiary. If you have that at 80%, you might be in a brother-sister situation. The second test for a brother-sister situation is what we call 50% effective control. And the 50% effective control looks at all of the owners in the grouping and checks to see if there's at least 50% among the mix of owners. And 50% effective control only looks at the lowest common denominator ownership for each owner. For example, let's say Bob owns 3 companies and he has 25% interest in each. He has 25% controlling interest in each of them, and he has effective control of 25%. If he had any one of those companies that was just at a 10% interest, then his effective control is just a 10%, the lower of the amount. There are lots of ways that you can make brother-sister pairs and parent subsidiaries, and you can even see combinations of those. And what I recommend, if you have a question, call your attorney or your other advisor. And the way we do it, we put all your companies into a spreadsheet, and we just compute out percentages of ownership all the way down and see if you have anything that could be a related entity. The last category down here, can I see a showing of hands for people that are in the service industry? You don't sell a product, or you're not a bank that has a lot of capital. Okay. So related entities is even more emphasized if you have service companies. There is no percentage threshold ownership. You could have 0.001% common ownership if you're in a service organization, and it might relate your companies. So just be very cautious. And professional service organizations have special rules here. So if you're in a service organization, usually we're looking for things like joint activities. Do your companies provide services to each other? Or do your companies provide services to the exact same customers? Or do your companies advertise together? Or do they build together? Those are some of the tests. And then the very last category down here is management. If you have decided to avoid these rules by carving out a management company and just put your managers in a company, and they only do management function activities, hiring, firing, supervision, you will have to aggregate them into. So I think, is there one more slide on this one? And here's just a general description. And I guess this is the only one I would want to know, because I've kind of gone through all of these tests. For healthcare reform in general, there is no rule that allows you to do a separate line of business exception. If we have some clients where their lines of business are separate enough that even if they have 100% ownership in 10 companies, they can segregate out their companies and fit under this exception rule, but that exception rule does not apply for any of the Affordable Care Act.
Yeah, the real point that I would make here is that this is complex stuff. When the reform law first came out, I said, oh, this isn't that big of a deal. I downloaded a college course off the internet and started messing around with it. I'll figure this out. I got about 12 pages into that course, and I realized that this is definitely the stuff for competent attorneys, okay? You probably don't want to be trying to make this determination yourself. If you even think that you have a potential issue, you definitely want to get in touch with somebody who's qualified to help you make that determination. So these next regulations, these are subject for small employers only. So now we're getting into the small employer portion of this presentation. The basics, I have heard so much misinformation out there about small employers being mandated to offer coverage. Let's be clear right now. If you are regulated as a small employer, there is no federal regulation for you to provide coverage. Okay, so there is not a regulation for employers under 50 employees, again, the test from the prior slides, to offer coverage. Not a small employer responsibility. Now that said, the market may put pressure on you to offer the coverage, right? The marketplace, because you're going to be competing with large employers for the same skill and talent. But There is no federal regulation saying you have to offer coverage. There's a lot of people saying, well, that's going to change in the future, and that, well, it's not right now. It's pretty clear in the law. Second, you've got the ability to obtain coverage on the exchange. Now, again, we're going to talk about the details of the exchange here when we get into market reforms, because it really is a lot to do with insurance markets. But starting next year, starting January 1st of next year, you will be able to secure coverage through the exchange-based programs. And then finally, you've got the ability to finally for this slide, you've got the ability to access tax credits through the SHOP program. Now, the SHOP program is a program that's going to be facilitated through the exchange that allows you as an employer to purchase coverage on the exchange and then receive federal tax credits to help reimburse you as an employer for your expenditures for the employee's coverage. There is already a tax subsidy right now for those of you large employers. You can be reimbursed up to 35% of your employer's cost of your insurance coverage under some certain parameters. So if the basics of this are, if you employ 25 or fewer employees and you have an average annual salary of $50,000 a year or less, then you may be eligible for tax subsidies under the current regulations and under SHOP program. SHOP and the current regulations both use the same income test and requirements. Now, right now, the tax subsidy is 35%. Come next year, if you buy through the SHOP exchange, that will go up to 50%. Right now, you can have any coverage you want. Come next year, if you want the tax subsidies for your small business, you must purchase through the SHOP program. That's the only place in the SHOP program that you can access your subsidies. Little known fact about these subsidies is that this is where, if you've got less than 25 employees with average, 25 or fewer employees with an average salary of $50,000 a year or less, then you qualify for some subsidy. But the way this subsidy works is it's a diminishing subsidy. So if you've got 24 employees and an average salary of $49,000 a year, you are going to get not nothing, but very, very close to nothing as far as your tax subsidy. Probably not enough to fill out the paperwork. The tax subsidy truly maximizes when you've got 10 or fewer employees with an average salary of $25,000 a year or less. So that's the basics on this, and then does anybody have anything else to add? We've got another slide on that. Yeah, hi. Please.
Just one thing to know is when you go on the SHOP, that's the only way you can get the credit is on the SHOP, and it's a 2-year credit, so it's 2 consecutive years. So you qualify in 2014, you're going to get it in 14 and 15. If you don't qualify until 2017, you get it 17 and 18. And so as we've been talking to clients going through this, we're looking at our insurance needs on a long-term basis, because a 50% credit is significant, but it's only 2 years. And if, depending on how much your insurance premiums are going to go up on a SHOP plan over a 10-year period, it may not look so attractive.
And depending on what your employment demographics are going to look like as well. And
Right.
you know that your company's kind of shrinking down a little bit, and if you're close to the 25-50 right now, you probably want to wait.
Is this 50% the same percentage for tax exempt as it is for tax?
No, the tax exempts are 25% for 2000. If you go to the next, is this the slide here? So 2010 through 2013, it was at 35%, and for tax exempts, it was at 25%. And then going into the 2-year program after 2014, it's 35% for tax exempts. But the other thing I would point out, if you're a small employer in the room and you haven't gotten that tax credit or you've never looked at it, it is a credit that's refundable, and there's a carryback for 5 years if you haven't had a profit. And you may be thinking, well, I have 25, it's not going to apply. But have somebody look at it. You might have some seasonal employees that would take you down and be able to qualify for the credit. And it is one that's refundable, so if you do an amended return, you can get it. And I think that was really my only, in addition to what everybody's already said.
Collette, do you guys have any expectation of how many small businesses you expect to be using SHOP? Again, Colette's with Blue Cross Blue Shield.
I know there are carriers that are in the shop. The only way that you can get the credits is through the shop, which will be on the exchange. We are not anticipating, based on the conversations that we've had around the state, a lot of interest in groups applying for the shop exchange. Today, we've noticed from the current tax credits that are available that there are very few groups that qualify. So again, you need to look at a lot of the underlying detail to determine whether or not you are, whether or not these tax credits are available for you. The option is certainly going to be there effective January 1st, 2014.
Do you know how many carriers have signed up for the shop in Montana?
The question was, do you know how many carriers have signed up for a shop in Montana and offer the shop coverage?
I know 3, but Christina, 3.
With the same number we have in the individual market, we have 3 insurers at this point in time. That could go up, even this year, actually, if we get another multi-state carrier, but more likely in 2015.
I was going to add one more thing. The healthcare tax credit has been one of those relatively quiet things out of this legislation, and we haven't seen any regulations coming down or activity. But in April, you may have noticed that President Obama issued his
proposed revenue proposals, and
in President Obama's April revenue proposals, he
suggested that this program be expanded to include a larger number of employees and a larger threshold for wages. But we haven't seen a legislative response to that April fiscal document yet.
Okay. The next major change that we're going to be talking about is going to be parent health insurance premiums. So starting January 1st of next year, in the small group market, so again, we're only talking small groups here. In the small group market, insurance carriers can no longer ask medical questions. So those health questionnaires that you send out in order to get a quote, those go away. And I know that's going to break your heart because I know how much fun it is to get that back from your employees, but that's no longer going to be an option there. And we're going to discuss the real implications of this in a future slide again when we get to the market reforms there about the particulars of how these products are now going to be rated. The other big thing, and this has gotten a lot of press here, and so maybe we'll spend a minute on this, is the maximum deductible, again, for small groups. It says right in the rules that the maximum deductible for small groups is $2,000 for an individual and $4,000 for a family. That's what's gotten the most press. What hasn't gotten a lot of press is this unless part. So the unless is that if there are some other cost-sharing requirements that, again, we'll get to in other slides. And one of the unless that was given is that you can't have a deductible higher than $2,000 for an individual or $4,000 for a family unless you can't hit these other cost-sharing requirements with a $2,000 deductible and a $4,000 maximum out of pocket. And when we get to how these plans are tested, you will see that basically it is impossible to make a bronze level plan, and again, this will make more sense here in a minute, but it's impossible to make a bronze level plan with a $2,000 deductible. You can't do it. Mathematically impossible. So they made this exception and said, and really what it comes down to here is they put a limit on the cost sharing, and they said that for this year, it refers back to the regulations that created health savings accounts. But the simple way to understand it is for this year, your maximum out-of-pocket can't be over about $6,000. So again, it refers back to the regulations, the HSA regulations, but they decided that the maximum cost sharing was more important than this minimum deductible here. So they allowed the increase of that. Now that said, the plans that are going to be offered by the insurance carriers are at the discretion of the insurance carrier, subject to state and federal approval. So did you want to add anything more about the maximum deductible, either Collette or Christina?
Well, those are the deductible levels, unless you're in a bronze plan. And then they have some flexibility around higher deductibles, but still meeting the maximum out of pocket. So all the other levels, the silver, the platinum, and the gold that we'll talk about later, have to fall into those deductible levels. And we're going to talk more about actuarial value plans, right? So we won't talk about that now, but every small group plan that is sold now has to be in one of those levels.
Okay, so now we're getting into the insurance regulations, and this is really where we're kind of going with that last slide anyways, is towards these insurance carrier regulations. Actually, let me stop. Is there any questions on the basics of the small group rules? You'll see there's not a whole lot of regulations on the small groups. It's more, there's some regulations for the insurance carriers, and there's going to be substantial changes to the insurance carriers, but actually, you as a group member or the head of a group needs to be worried about not a huge amount of stuff there. So big market changes. So starting January 1st, 2014, insurance carriers can no longer put a pre-existing condition on medical conditions. So right now, if you go without medical insurance coverage for more than 63 days, an insurance carrier can impose a 12-month pre-existing condition on you, saying that we will not provide coverage for that condition within 12 months of the purchase of the policy. After 12 months of the purchase of the policy, then your pre-existing condition goes away. Now that's oversimplified a little bit, but that's the general rules that we're dealing with right now. Starting January 1st of next year, that goes away. There are no pre-existing conditions. A carrier cannot limit their payment based upon the fact that it was a pre-existing condition under any circumstances, even if you went without medical insurance. Step 2, all insurance coverage is guaranteed issue and guaranteed renewable. Now, guaranteed renewable, we already have this in Montana. This just says that if I buy an insurance policy and I get sick, my insurance carrier can't non-renew me, right? They can't just say, nope, you're using the policy, no more insurance for you, cut you off on renewal. Guaranteed issue is a big difference from what we're dealing with in the individual marketplace. So in Montana right now, group insurance coverage, and this is largely a federal law, group insurance coverage is guaranteed issue, meaning that all individuals in the group must be offered the same policy regardless of their health status. Okay, so you can't single out people. In the individual marketplace, absolutely they can single out people. So in the individual marketplace in Montana right now, they can absolutely say, Bob, yeah, we'll go ahead and give you a policy. Morgan, you look like you're going to use it. No policy for you. And then between Bob and me as my wife, and she's a little healthier than me, but not as healthy as Bob, we'll go ahead and sell it to you, but we're going to rate it way up. So they can offer different rates for different health statuses and line out deny coverage. Right? That's the way we've got in Montana right now. Starting next year, that goes away. Now, philosophically, this is my opinion right now, but I think that this, and I think if you talk to the underwriters at the different insurance carriers, I know I spoke with the underwriters of Blue Cross, Allegiance, and Pacific Source are all pretty much the same, and they all believe that this isn't right. The fact that we're not allowing people to participate in the program, that we just say, no, you had a medical event, some years ago, and we're just not going to let you buy into this system, period, end of story. They all, don't really agree with the general philosophy behind that. And I think that we can agree as a nation that it's inappropriate to exclude people from being part of our system. And that's really what a no guaranteed issue does. Now, there's no pre-existing condition exclusions. I've got a little bit of a problem with this, because if there's no pre-existing condition, why in the world would I buy insurance before I get sick, right? Now, to avoid that issue, of me just waiting until I get sick and then buying insurance, they gave us open enrollment periods. So now with individual medical insurance, you will only be able to enroll, and I think Christina mentioned this earlier, you can only enroll in the period between October 1st and January 1st. This first year they extended it to March because we're expecting some bumps with having a new program together. But basically, yeah, all individual medical insurance will be a January 1 effective date that you enroll between October and December. So this is a big change for us as far as just the general concept of I really can wait until I wreck the car to buy the insurance as long as I can make it to January 1st before I start receiving treatment. Question on that?
So what happens if somebody retires in June, loses their company coverage? Then what?
They refer to qualifying event rules, just like with a group medical insurance policy right now. If you had coverage and then you lose it, that doesn't count. It's in the generals of if you just decide to buy insurance. But this is going to be something that's very different for people. You can't just go in June and decide to buy medical insurance, right? If you're an individual, you can't just change your mind and buy it mid-year. You got to wait until the open enrollment. If you have any of the qualifying event changes, then that would be different. Does anybody else have anything to add on this one?
Just to reiterate what he said is that the only thing new on this slide for small employers really is the existing condition exclusion. Because we guarantee issue, or what in the small group market, guaranteed availability to small employers since the mid-90s. And guaranteed renewability since 1997 when HIPAA passed. It became a federal law. But the one thing I want to talk about was clinical trials. We have, in the 2013 legislature did in fact pass a clinical trials bill in Montana. But it only applies to cancer, and it is effective now. But it is basically the same as what's in the ACA, and the ACA law applies to all major illnesses, so not just cancer, all catastrophic illnesses. So, and the only thing that clinical trials actually changes, it clarifies that if you are in a clinical trial, then the routine costs of care that you would have incurred otherwise would have to be covered, because that was a problem that sometime occurred. The clinical trial provider pays for the cost of the clinical trial. So if you're covering someone who is in a clinical trial, they pay for the drugs, they pay for everything related to the trial, but that person may also need other cancer treatment or other kinds of drugs, and those need to be paid for by the insurance company or the health plan.
Collette, I don't know if you want to touch this one with the 10-foot pole, but I've had a lot of questions. Oh, I'm sorry. We got a question here?
I just have one question going back to the guaranteed issue and the no pre-existing condition. How's that going to interface with the MCHA high-risk plan? Will that still be in a...
There's no need for, it is not only is there no need for MCHA anymore, but it's illegal to purify risk out.
Yeah, the legislature passed a bill that allows the MCHA board to wind down the plan, and that is happening. The federal pool closes and absolutely shuts down on Jan 1, and there is a wind down plan for all the other pools, because beginning January 1, 2014, anyone can get other coverage through the exchange.
Thank you.
Oh, yeah, you had a question?
So, if you do have an employee who has had a serious illness, now they have to be covered, but can they charge more for them, or it's just based on, what criteria they use?
We'll get into how rates are established here in pretty good detail in the next couple of slides. The question I was going to ask you, Collette, if you dare to tackle it, is there's a lot of stuff in the news that I've read about what no pre-existing condition and about what guaranteed issue is going to do to the cost of individual medical insurance. Do you care to address that one?
Sure, I'll touch on that. So, as all of you have heard, anywhere from people have said 20 to 100% we'll see some increase in rates in the individual and small group block. And within Montana, we've had some additional regulation in place that's controlled a lot of the rating. And so we don't do gender rating today. And so we really had a lot of additional control and regulation. So we will not be from, I mean, again, it'll vary from carrier to carrier, but Blue Cross Blue Shield of Montana is not anticipating seeing those exorbitant amounts of increases. We will see some changes based on rating where you cannot be higher than a 3-to-1 ratio on rates. So meaning if I have a young, healthy person, I can't rate them compared to an older, sicker person. I can't have a greater than a 3-to-1 ratio in that overall rate. So some of the younger, healthier people will see their rates increase a little bit more, and some of the sicker, older individuals will see their rates come down a little bit. So there's a give and take on who will be covering and subsidizing some of that rating. And we will have, so within the rating, we'll be able to rate on age, we'll be able to rate on geographic area, and tobacco use.
Oh, no, I thought it was the next slide. I thought that was the one. I thought it was the next slide. Anybody else have any questions on the basic stuff? And Christina, when I was in your office on Monday, I was kind of pleasantly surprised, and she said they're not as bad as people are saying they are. I think it was. I tried to get her to tell me she's wrong.
Right. Well, the rates aren't public until after the review is complete, but I think the commissioner may be releasing some general information about rates, and I would agree with everything that Collette said. Many people will see rate decreases in the individual market. Now remember, and we'll talk about it more, but the individual market is also got there's a lot of stabilizers in it because there's reinsurance, risk corridors, and risk adjustment. The small group market, there's not as many of the stabilizers, for instance, reinsurance, so those rates might be just a bit higher, but they are not just these catastrophic illness, catastrophic increases that the press likes to talk about.
And with the thing to remember is that with small group, the majority of this stuff, we're already doing this right now. We have been for some years, and it's already built into your rates. And it's, whereas we're going to have rates, come to some middle ground here. It's not going to be the end all that, that we've seen in a lot of the, some of the national articles there. Qualifying coverage. So part of the requirements of the healthcare reform law is to regulate how, not only what's covered, but how it's covered. So some standardization within your insurance contracts. Right now, particularly with self-insured, just about as creative as you can write a contract that can basically pay for about any way that you can imagine. That's not going to fly anymore here pretty soon. There's going to be some standardization amongst insurance contracts, and I'm a believer in this because if you take two contracts and you try to compare those two together, good luck. If you want me to sign off that there are absolutely no differences between two insurance contracts, I will not do it under any circumstances. I'll quit my job. Because I can't verify that that's a fact. It depends on the specific language, and that would be better off for one of the three attorneys we've got present to be able to explain some of that. But the basic concept here is that they put some restrictions on what's going to be covered and how it's going to be covered. So coverage must meet minimum essential coverage requirements. So there's two different parts of this. There's your essential health benefits, and then there's your cost-sharing limitations. So your essential health benefits, your EHBs, this answers the question, what's covered under my contract, right? What actually is covered? And this provides you the information. And so the general methodology here is that in the healthcare reform law, there was 10 basic categories that had to be covered. Ambulatory services and surgical services and preventive care and all this kind of stuff. So there's 10 basic services. Then within those basic services, then they took and they said, well, we're also going to use the most common contract in the state of Montana, which happened to be a Blue Cross contract, and that's going to be what's covered. We're going to standardize the contracts in the small group world in Montana, and this is how we're going to come up with what that contract covers. So that's the first part of it. Then you come up with the cost sharing limitation. So this is the question of how is it covered? Not what's covered under the contract, but how is it covered? What kind of my deductibles look like? What do my co-pays look like? The cost sharing requirements under the contract. Now, there's a couple of cost sharing limitations. This one I alluded to on a prior slide. That is that you can't have a maximum out of pocket any higher than that allowed under high deductible health plan HSA law. So it refers back to that law, which comes up with a number, but then inflates it for, or adjusts it for inflation and everything. So it's kind of messy to communicate, but basically, in 2013, you can't have a maximum out of pocket of over $6,250 for an individual, $12,500 for a family. So that's the highest out-of-pocket expenses you can have on the plan right there. Then it comes up with a minimum actuarial value. So it comes up with an actuarial value, and the idea behind an actuarial value is they take a few 100,000 people, they take all the claims by that few 100,000 people, and they add them up, and they say, okay, take that, divide that by how many people we got, and that's our average cost per person. Now, if we layer that, if we take our new insurance plan and we layer that over those claims, the plan has to pay at least 60% of the claim cost of an average person in an average population, okay? Now, there's a bunch of different ways to get to a 60% minimum actuarial value. There's lots of different ways using different deductibles and co-insurances and things like that. The big part is that the maximum out-of-pocket can't be higher than the HDHP HSA regulations. So that's the basics of it. Kristy, would you like to add any more, or Christina, or Collette? Anybody want to?
Do you have a slide on the 10 categories?
Not on the 10 categories.
Okay, so that is one difference that you see is that there's not a lot. The benchmark plan in Montana was the largest small employer group plan by enrollment in the first quarter of 2012, which was Blue Dimensions. There really isn't a lot of, we didn't really have any missing categories in our benchmark. And the categories are inpatient, outpatient, laboratory services, mental health, chemical dependency coverage, maternity. But the one that you will see a difference, especially in the individual market, is mental health and chemical dependency now has to have full parity with physical illness generally. The other one you'll see, not in the benchmark plan because it always had it, but in a lot of plans, especially those sold in the individual market, they were sometimes sold without any prescription drug coverage. So this is a benefit that's now guaranteed to all people that are in the individual and small group market.
Yeah, there's a slide on the different actuarial values here just shortly. Yeah.
Actually, this is a question that I've had about essential health benefits from clients, comparing the small group plan that is the benchmark plan, and some benefits in there are things like chiropractic, I think there might be podiatry. How are those benefits? Are they treated as required because they're in that plan, or how does that translate?
Well, generally speaking, there's also a data template with 45 elements on it, but that is not the world of essential health benefits. They told us that we needed to review pretty much for everything that was in the benchmark plan needs to be carried over. So, for instance, if there had been, say, coverage for hearing aids, that could have been translated to the benchmark in Montana, particularly if it had been a mandate. So even though it's outside the 10 categories. However, the important part of that is otherwise the state would have to defray the cost of the subsidy that might flow to that person for that particular benefit. I'm probably getting a little too into the weeds, but I would say that it's not true in every single instance, because we've gone in and we've asked specific questions. Like, for instance, emergency services out of country has to be covered, but even though the Blue plan also covers non-emergency services out of country, we're not enforcing that as to the other. Yeah, so there's a few exceptions, but most of it is, It is everything that's in that plan.
You know what, this is a great place for us to take a break. We've talked about what kind of policies have to be provided. Let's take a 5-minute break really quick, and then we'll get started. What's that? Is 5 minutes long enough? Do we need to go longer than 5? Okay, let's do a 5-minute break. We'll get back together at 9:35. Yes, sir? Yeah.
Out-of-pocket was $650.
Yeah.
So if you have an HRA, for the purpose of HRAs, kind of subsidize that cost for the employee, the employer, funds that portion of it. So are HRAs still going to be valid, or are they thing of the past?
Now, it depends on whether or not you're talking about large or small group. Now, with large group, these restrictions aren't on the insurance carriers. Now, these restrictions, what we're talking about with small group is there's restrictions on the insurance carriers so that you can't have a maximum out of pocket over $6,250. So you could have an HRA that bought down that maximum out of pocket, right? And so that would be absolutely acceptable, no gray area there, okay? Your question is more, can I have a $10,000 deductible plan and use an HRA to buy it down to a $2,000 deductible plan? Can I do that side of it? My understanding is that these are insurance company regulations, so even though you wouldn't be in any violation with the regulations of doing that, the insurance company just can't sell you one of them, right? So is that accurate, that explanation there, Collette?
For the small group? Yes. But, so keep in mind that even on the large group side, that you need to offer affordable coverage with a minimum actuarial value of at least 60%. So if you don't do that, then your employees would be eligible for, to go to the exchange and get subsidies. So there is a fine line on what your minimum actuarial value should be. But for small group and individual, all of the plans that are going to be offered are an actuarial value of at least 60%. But as far as the HRA information, is there any other guidance on that?
Yeah, I agree with everything here. In the insurance world, if you have an HRA design right now, like the high deductible, and use the HRA to buy it down, that sort of structure you could still use within a self-funded plan. But being a small employer, usually self-funding isn't always a wise choice. But some self-funded association plans can still do that, but not in the insurance market.
So is the idea then, the only reason you want to keep an HRA is to just add that as an additional benefit? Because then you can pay it down even farther for the employee.
Yep.
Right?
Yep, and you would have actually more ability to customize a program for your employees than using something that's a standardized product for an insurance carrier. Or when you're trying to differentiate yourself in the employment marketplace, that might be something your firm absolutely wants to do.
You could use the HRA to reimburse things that aren't covered by the plan, like orthodontia. Is one that's common, something similar to a flex type arrangement too.
Come January 1, can we use HRA to pay for premiums?
No.
We can't even come January 1?
No. Anybody else want to? There's a pretty specific. They came out with some pretty specific regulations that said if you have an HRA that doesn't reimburse what's underneath the medical plan there, if you just have an HRA, that's a self-funded medical plan subject to unlimited lifetime maximums. You can't use that HRA to purchase the underlying coverage. Now, you can still use other, the thing is as long as it's an employer plan, you're allowed to use the Section 125 rules to take that pre-tax already. So, but anybody else want to add any more to that? There's some pretty specific regulations that came out that limited the ability to use those HRAs there.
I would agree, and although this can get legally complex, when you do that, you're also setting yourself up to look like the sponsor of the plan if you're funding the premium that way. So even though they're buying in the individual market. So there's a lot of issues that can arise.
So if I'm a small employer and I just I can't afford to offer health insurance benefits to my employee, but I want to contribute something, I can set up an HRA standalone?
No.
I can't. I either offer insurance or I offer nothing?
There are some other options, but the HRA concept is pretty much gone.
You can offer a flex plan.
You
Flex
could
plan,
offer,
cafeteria plan. Yeah, you can do a flex plan, section 125 medical, unreimbursed medical. It's got a use it or lose it function is really the only, and I wouldn't say that's the only substantial difference, but that's a major difference between an HRA and a flex plan there.
you mean an HSA?
No, an HRA and a flex, and just a medical flexible spending account.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
And, right, I would agree. You can raise wages.
What about right now, the ones where that's fully reimbursable for the insurance premium, are those going away then?
Oh, I'm sorry, I did not understand
So
the,
like right now, you can have the things set up with the IRS, it's not like the flex or the HRA, but it's only reimbursable from the insurance premium?
A premium reimbursement.
Yeah, are those still gonna be?
This is an interesting. Yeah, it's a very interesting question,
what is the
because you
question?
start to ask.
The question that, sorry to interrupt, the question that we're discussing here is right now, you can use an you can use a, call it a cafeteria plan, to reimburse, the cost of premiums, right? And so I think what we're getting to here is, can I use a cafeteria arrangement to reimburse an individual policy that somebody buys outside of my group? Is that the basics there? But there's already some concerns about doing that because of the HIPAA regulations and doing that in Montana, and Montana's actually got a few laws about that. So if you guys want to.
I think that's right. I mean, I think any of the stuff we're talking about right now these are going to be really general answers, because there are, anytime, as Christina pointed out, anytime you start to take on that role as employer of reimbursing a premium or essentially buying insurance, then you are going to be probably creating your own little mini self-funded plan, which no matter how small it is, can be subject to all of the ERISA rules, HIPAA, COBRA, yada, yada, yada. So, but with that in mind, for some groups who are willing to take on that kind of a risk or responsibility, and they want to get creative, there are some designs that are possible. And I think that the cafeteria plan is one vehicle that can be used. Cafeteria plan has been around for a very long time. Proposed rules were issued in 2007. We still don't have final rules on those, but they can be relied upon. And within those rules, they actually do permit reimbursement of premiums for individual policies through cafeteria plan. That is a recognized qualified benefit. So that is something that some people are looking at as a way for a small employer to continue to, like you say, provide some benefit without having to go and dive into this. So.
Sarah or Christina, in the 2013 legislative session, was there not a bill passed about premium payment?
There was, I think there's some, and I won't go into great detail on that, but I believe there's some serious legal issues with that bill, which we did alert the sponsor to, that it may well create some of the issues that Sarah just spoke about. And I believe under the guidance that we had, at least at the time that HIPAA was developed, it would be not legal. And I haven't seen new guidance that would change that at this point.
Well, just to kind of sum up, because I would like to move us along. If you're considering if you're currently or considering reimbursing individual medical insurance policies on a pre-tax basis through your firm, you want to talk to a professional about the issues you're facing right now. Because whether you're talking about right now or whether you're talking about into the future, there's some specific issues that are very complicated beyond the scope of the time that we have today to really dig into it. They're probably an hour or two or more discussion in their own right. So.
And another issue I just want to bring up is with this idea of flat contribution, is age discrimination is another issue that arises when that happens. Because obviously if you're contributing a flat dollar amount to all your employees, it's going to benefit your younger employees way more than your older employees who have to pay premiums that are 3 times higher.
And you will see why here in just a minute. So I want to jump on to insurance exchanges. One more question.
Can I just get one clarification? Is an HRA the same as an HSA?
No, so you've got a flexible spending account. I'll give you the real quick rundown of the differences between the two. Medical flexible spending account, also referred to as a flex plan. The employer or the employee can put money into the account. You have to guess at the beginning of you can't change it during the year, and it's a use it or lose it function, right? So that's my flexible spending account. That's my medical flexible spending account. My health reimbursement arrangement, my HRA, general characteristics are only the employer can fund the account. There is no use it or lose it function. The employer can basically write the contract to, within reason, cover about any way that they want to. There is no use it or lose it account function to it that can build from year to year, but it's an asset of the employer. If the employee leaves, that is an employer asset until the claims are incurred. With the HSA, a health savings account, a health savings account is an individually owned asset. So that's the big difference between an HSA and an HRA. It's a checking account with somebody, an HSA is a checking account with somebody's name on it. Both the employer and the employee can contribute funds into the account. There's no use it or lose it function, but it is an asset of the employee, not the employer. So those are the differences between the general categories of what we're dealing with. Now, there's other differences that we could again, spend quite a bit of time talking about the specifics of it, but it is important to understand those general categories there. Then, independent of all those, you've got your premium conversion plan. Your premium conversion plan is what allows you to take group insurance premiums out of an employee's check on a pre-tax basis. Those are your four general kinds of pre-tax accounts that we work with employers. But I want to jump onto the exchange because there's a lot for us to talk about here. So the exchange here, I want to be, I see a lot of information, I read a lot about this stuff, and I think it's really important for us to be clear about what we're talking about when we talk about an exchange. An exchange is a web-based portal by which you shop insurance coverage. An exchange is not insurance coverage. An exchange is not any other thing. An exchange, think esurance.com or something, right? You got a portal, you put your data in, and you get quotes. It's not the coverage that's provided, it is the portal by which you shop that coverage. So I like to be real clear about that because there's a lot of misinformation about people thinking they're only going to, if I buy exchange coverage and I have to buy the federal government coverage. Right now there is no federal government option. There is Blue Cross Blue Shield, Pacific Source, and the co-op. That's who's filed on the exchange. So, so that's the basics of the exchange. So what is it? It's that web-based portal. It's established by the state. The state of Montana did not establish one, so we're going to have the federal exchange. This one, there was a lot of hubbub about it, but I don't see why. If it's just a website, who cares which website we use, as long as it's user-friendly, right? And if we don't have to pay to make it, I don't know, I guess that was my thought. Why not? Question?
Yeah, you said that there is no federal program, right, on the exchange? Will
Not
there
at
be one
this
in the
point.
future?
Not at this point.
Will there
There's
be
not.
one in the future then?
There could be one. Anybody else want to touch on that one?
Now, I think when Morgan says federal program, single payer, government payer. There is no government payer on the exchange. This is an exchange that sells private insurance products. The closest thing that we have to that is something called a multi-state plan, where there's actually a federal agency that's negotiating the contract with the insurance company. And within 2-3 years, we should have 2 multi-state plans. We probably have one now. One has to be nonprofit, one has to be for-profit. But no, federal government insurance, that in terms of a single payer that's government, is not occurring except through Medicaid.
And just a clarification, on the multi-state plan, it is still a private carrier. So again, it's one for-profit, one not-for-profit. You need to, the first year, be in at least 30 states throughout the United States. And so, again, it's not a federal plan, it's private carriers, all on the exchange.
It can be based on the federal employee health plan benchmark, though. But it can also be based on the benchmark in the state.
So the exchange it allows people and businesses to shop for coverage, estimate tax subsidies, and also make payments. The exchange also offers medical insurance coverage with standardized plans with standardized actuarial values. So before, when we were talking about these actuarial values, we were talking gold, silver, bronze. Here's where we get to it. So the plans that are offered on these exchanges must have specific actuarial values that equate to metal values. So so the bronze plan. The bronze plan must have an actuarial value of plus or minus 2% of 60%. So 60% plus or minus 2%. I cannot have a 60% to 65% actuarial value on an exchange-based product, right? Because it would be between a silver and a bronze plan. So each carrier has the discretion by which they come up with a bronze plan, a silver plan, a gold plan, and a platinum plan. And again, all these plans must cover the essential health benefits that we outlined in prior slides, but the carriers have a large degree of flexibility in how they allocate deductibles and co-insurance and co-pays to come up with these actuarial values. So that's one of my concerns on these exchange programs is people might think, oh, well, if it's a silver plan, one silver plan is the same as another silver plan. And not necessarily. It has a lot to do with how those programs are structured, the internal structuring. I could make you a silver plan that's a really good plan. I could make one that's not such a good plan for you, depending on what your medical utilization is. And that's going to be something where I truly, as an insurance professional, think that I still add some value here. And so, a little plug for me, and those of us in the industry, but it is the idea here is to make it simpler for people to shop for coverage, right? So that people have a real simple one-stop shop. They can go on, they dump in their information in this exchange, and they can get back some basic quotes that they have some stability. They don't have to become an insurance expert. They know that the basics of the coverage here. So that's what I have for it, and I think Collette, do you want to, and then also I want to just introduce the idea that there are some plans that are offered off the exchange. So you're going to have your plans that are offered on the exchange, and they're going to be subject to the minimum the specific actuarial values of bronze, silver, gold, and platinum. Then you're going to have some plans that are offered off the exchange, so each carrier can offer a suite of products on and off the exchange. And Collette, do you want to talk about?
I just wanted to, plans off the exchange in the small group market are also restricted to the metal levels. And I think the slide may have a knot in there that shouldn't be there. The plans are both inside and outside the exchange have the same metal levels, follow the same requirements, legal requirements substantially. There's really no difference, and they can't have different rates if they're substantially the same plan. The only difference in the shop is you can be eligible for a tax credit.
Why would you buy anything off the exchange?
I should point out that there are other carriers selling off the exchange in the small group market and in the individual market, but mostly in the small group market. So you have a wider choice of insurers, but those insurers have to follow the same rules that the inside the exchange insurers are following. They have to have essential health benefits. They have to be metal levels. Okay.
So the plans would be the same?
Well, plans are never identical, as Morgan is. They have to follow with business actuarial value, but it doesn't mean that every bronze plan has the same deductible or every silver plan, because it's a cost-sharing combination of co-insurance, co-payments, and deductible. And they're all subject to the same out-of-pocket maximum, even if you buy a bronze plan of $6,350 for an individual.
So what's the difference of buying plans through the exchange or off the exchange? So her question,
right,
I heard you said is you don't get any tax subsidies for it if you buy it off the exchange, but you only get it if you're on the exchange?
Right. The main difference for small employers would be eligibility for the federal tax credit.
You have no chance of getting that if you buy it off the exchange.
Right. Not starting 2014. And then and even more importantly, individuals under 400% of federal poverty level all qualify for advanceable premium tax credits if they buy in the individual market exchange, and those are only available through the exchange. You
You're
can.
talking about individuals, not small companies.
Pardon?
You're talking about individuals, not.
I'm talking about individual market exchange on the, and if you want a federal tax credit as an employer, if you're eligible for one, you need to buy through the shop, which is a separate exchange for small businesses.
The shop and the exchange are not the same thing.
I'm sorry, yeah, there's an individual market exchange and a shop exchange. When it comes marketing time, the individual exchange is known as the Federally Facilitated Marketplace, or the FFM. The shop is noticed as the FF shop, the Federally Facilitated Shop. So they're both on the same website, most likely, but they're separate portals because they sell different products.
So are any of these out now for people to look at?
Like I said earlier, probably you won't be able to view the website until September. We will know which plans have been certified to sell in the exchange in August, and you might be able to get some information on the Commissioner's website.
And who's gonna let us know? Our insurance agent, or who's gonna let?
I think you should always call your insurance agent. If you work with an agent now, you certainly should continue if you like that arrangement, because agents and are selling on exchange products as well as off. They do have to be certified to sell on the exchange.
But those tax subsidies are only available for the first, you only get 2 years of.
For small employers, not for individuals.
Yeah, but you only get them, only available for 2 years. That's correct.
Any estimation of difference in rates between on the exchange and?
It's illegal to have different rates on and off the exchange.
The rates will be the same on and off exchange.
That's one of the major differences that they did with this law from the law that it was modeled after in Massachusetts. My understanding is that in Massachusetts they did not have a stipulation that you had to have the same rates on and off the exchange, and so they created substantial cherry picking opportunities there, for lack of a better word.
So again, just to reiterate what Christina said, so the primary difference between on exchange and off exchange, on exchange for small group, you are eligible for tax credits up to 50%. Off exchange, there are no tax credits available for small group. For individuals, on exchange is where you are eligible for subsidies for premium and both cost sharing. So cost sharing subsidies are 250% federal poverty level or less. That will help pay for some of your out-of-pocket expenses like deductibles, co-insurance, those type of out-of-pocket. The premium tax, as it implies, for 400% federal poverty level or less, will cover a portion of your premium for on exchange. Individuals off exchange, the products will look exactly alike. However, there's no subsidies available if you purchase those products off exchange. And there may be, I would say, more options off exchange in products. But I guess we'll see when we all have access to the exchange and when it's available to view it, really what all those different options that are available there.
So, come tax time, how are we gonna know who purchased, if I was a tax professional, how are we gonna know where the insurance is purchased?
We're going to get into the subsidies here in just a second, how the subsidy, I got 4 slides on tax subsidies, and we'll get into that for the individual side of things just right after we get through the market regulations. Yes, one more?
Okay, for individuals or companies who buy it off the exchange, are they still limited to the dates, like on the exchange, October through 1st?
Those requirements are not applicable to employers. They are only applicable to individuals, not applicable to group products. That's very clear in the regulations.
So the individual going off the exchange and getting premiums, is it still October through the end of the year?
Yeah, oh, sorry, yes,
Off the
absolutely.
exchange, okay.
So is there any benefit whatsoever to buying off of the exchange?
That remains to be seen. You know, you'll have,
Other than being able to choose a different carrier?
as an
All
insurance
plans
agent,
are going to
as an
have
agent right now, what I've been telling everybody is, I have no way of telling you, we have to wait and see. It sure doesn't look like it, but it also, you know, there might be, you know, I've heard some talk, you know, kind of like Collette alluded to, that there might be some additional, you know, some smaller flexibilities there. Where it's not just one specific product that's a bronze plan or whatever, you might have, you know, multiple different bronze plans, I'm not sure exactly.
So that's the only difference of you getting tax credit, paying more for your insurance, basically.
Yeah.
And I just wanted to go back to a question that I heard in the back. Somebody was asking, how are we supposed to know? Tax season's coming. We're not going to know. Who are our individuals who are getting all of this, and how are we tracking all of it? Some of those questions are still up in the air. We've been promised that there's going to be a reporting system, and people will be reporting all of this. If you're asking for advanced subsidies, you'll be reporting it earlier than others, but some of the reporting won't be happening until year end. So we'll be watching for all of these forms that are promised to us for different kinds of reporting mechanisms, and then all of that should come back together for you later so you can compute all of this.
For anybody who's attending the large employer session, you will also see that there's going to be substantial new reporting requirements there as well.
They'll also be on your individual tax return, you will be asked if you have health insurance and what it is.
Yeah.
Otherwise,
Yeah, you'll have to,
You'll be
there will have to be an audit for that. We're just about to get into that. So first, before we get into the individual requirements, I want to touch just on a little bit more about these fair health insurance premiums. So again, this is a market regulation. Insurance carriers can no longer ask medical questions. It applies to small group and individual coverage. It's effective January 1st of this year. They can no longer, again, rate your policy based upon utilization or health status. Your rates are based upon 4 things. How many people are you going to cover? How old are the people that you're going to cover? Do they use tobacco or not? And where do they live? So we'll start backwards and go through this one. So tobacco use, they can do a maximum differential of 1.5 to 1. Do we know about how if you want to talk about how the carriers are going to deal with this in Montana? Do you plan on using the tobacco rating of the 1.5 to 1? Or anybody care to?
No, I don't think we are really incorporating that at this point. I mean, it's an option for us to use that moving forward. So we're going to, you know, evaluate what things look like and, you know, what the clientele looks like. But it's just knowing that it's an option.
Yeah. To be clear, what we're talking about here is if the rate's $500 and I use tobacco, the rate for me is $750, right? If we're all enrolling on the internet, right? And I know that question costs me 50%. I have questions as an insurance agent about how honest the public is going to be about that. Because we run into from time to time where sometimes people aren't quite so honest about some things. And this one is one that, you know, I wonder the actual utilization of it, particularly in the individual market. There's some restrictions about how they use that.
but we have seen, they are filed. The surcharges are filed.
Okay.
But not as uniformly in the small group market as they are in the individual.
Okay. Geographic rating area, we could have different geographic rating areas, but we didn't in Montana. Montana's one rating area, one.
No.
No, Montana has 4 geographic rating areas. Well, it happened that the Fed said, you know, when they came out with the last set of rating rules, they told the states how many they could have. If they wanted more than their allowable amount, they had to apply for an exception. The commissioner was allowed to designate, so we chose the maximum, and then we also chose, instead of we chose a system that's based on a combination of counties. So the 4 areas are basically some counties surrounding Billings and then Bozeman, Helena, Great Falls, and then the third area is Missoula, Kalispell, through the Flathead, and the fourth area is all the rest of the states that is not included in one of the other areas. So basically the rural areas.
That's the one that's the rating area that looks
Yeah.
logical.
No, so there is geographic rating differences in all of the filed rates.
So which one's the highest or worst?
It's not uniform from company to company. It depends on a lot of things related to utilization and provider discounts that the insurer has negotiated in that particular area.
So the other rating, thank you for correcting me on that, I must have missed the memo there. I thought I read all of it. Yeah, age maximum differential is 3 to 1, so the maximum difference that you can have, the most you can charge your oldest adult is 3 times what you charge your youngest adult. And I believe we're 10 to 1 in Montana right now?
No, no, not at all. We actually surveyed the entire market, and the study is on the CSI website, and many carriers are at 3 to 1. We do, and if you average all of them out, they came out to I think it was 3.5 to 1. So we are not far outside of the 3 to 1 age differential, which is another reason why you won't see the huge rate increases that some states have rating differentials that are more like 8 to 1, but not in Montana. Okay.
Well, okay. Number of covered individuals, so it's rated on a per person basis. So the way that things are now rated, it used to be that you would send in your application, it would be rated by an underwriter, and things that would go into that were age and were health status and prescription utilization, all those kinds of things. Now, now what we're running into is we've got index rating with an age banding. So the way that this works is that for each different insurance policy that they choose, so you take your bronze contract. So for my bronze contract that has the specific deductibles and everything that we're talking about, the way this works is that an insurance company comes up with an index rate for that product. Then the insurance company, so they come up with an index rate here. And from the index rate, they apply the standardized age bands provided by CMS. And Montana has not done our own age banding, right?
We don't have the authority. No.
Okay. And I thought those were part of the package. So anyways, the way this works, insurance company comes up with their index rate for a product, and then they can apply these standardized age banding. So the way this works is if I'm under 21 years old, I pay 0.635 of the index rate. Okay, if I'm under 21 years old, whether I'm 1 day old or 1 day from my 21st birthday, I'm considered a child. I pay 0.635 of the index rate. At age 21, between 21 and 24, I go to a 1.0 multiplier. Then after that, each year, I go up by the small increments that are shown on the board. So at age 25, I go up to a 1.004. At age 26, a 1.024. And what it does is it creates a cost curve that looks like this. So again, before I'm 21, I pay 0.635, then between 21 and 24, I pay the 1.0, and then my rates go up until they reach my maximum at age 64. They top out.
What if you're a smoker?
Then you would take this and you would add 50% to it. Your line would be identical to this. It would just be 50% higher. Okay? And the insurance company can have different products, different index rates for different products. So starting next year, this is going to be very much simpler to understand and predict what my rates are going to be. One of the concerns that I've heard from small groups is that, when you read the regulations, is that the rate methodology has to maintain with this. So if Morgan's 35, his 35 and his wife's 34, and they've got 2 kids, you sum those numbers up together, and that's what my rates are. If you've got a group of 40 or 50 people, that kind of rating can be cumbersome there, right? Where each person in the group could conceivably have a different rate. Now, there's some regulations that say, or there's some language in the regulations that say, we're not saying that the insurance companies have to pass it on to the, or excuse me, that the employer has to pass it on to the employees this way, but we're saying this is the underlying rate methodology. It also has some language in there that says that we as a state can choose to have, and there's nothing saying, there's nothing saying that states can't require insurance companies to compositize those rates before they're issued. So,
Well, I think it's an employer choice. I'm not sure that it's a carrier choice. I think that employers can choose to offer composite rates, and most insurers will accommodate that.
okay.
When you say composite rate, does that mean just give a flat rate for all people, whether you're 55 or 24?
Not based on age.
Yeah.
But you do have the right still as an employer to allow the 25-year-old to play the 25 rate that you're actually being charged, and the 55 that rate, and also the smoker, their smoking rate versus passing it on.
Right, as long as you're paying a percentage of the premium.
This is where it comes to what Christina was saying about potential for age discrimination, where you say I give everybody $200, and so somebody who's 21 years old covers 100%, somebody's 50 years old or 60 years old, it doesn't cover half.
You pay a percentage. You pay 50% of everyone's premium if it's a 25-year-old rate, if it's a 55-year-old rate.
But then I am discriminating because I'm giving the 60-year-old
No,
more.
you're paying for half the insurance.
And there's a lot of back and forth that you could be doing on that, and that's still a, kind of a gray area there.
Actually, the question would be, the tobacco user that's gonna get a higher rate, can employers say, I'm not gonna pay that, since you chose to smoke, you have to pay that higher premium, I'm only gonna pay 50% of the regular premium?
Yeah, I think the surcharge, yeah.
Oh, that's good to know.
Yeah.
So to be clear, we do not have to pay for a smoker the increased premium due to the smoker being premiumed up, but you're saying we have to pay the percentage of the
But your
age.
insurance company has to pay for the tobacco cessation program.
Yeah.
If
Yeah.
they choose to, and that could take away the surcharge.
I was just going to add one more comment too. We're talking about a couple different things here for you. Some of it has to do with non-discrimination, and some of it is going to have to do with how you can get that small business tax credit. And there are pretty specific rules. If you want to claim the small business tax credit, there's a rule in there that says that you must uniformly pay for 50% or more of the health insurance premium. And there are a whole host of additional rules that talk to you about what uniformity means. Uniformity for 2010 through 2012 has been very relaxed. So if you have a composite insurance premium for everybody in your group versus if you have tiers of premiums for people that are in your group, the uniformity principles are applied differently. Once we go into 2013 and those 2 years that you get for tax credits, 2014, sorry, the uniformity rules are much more strict at that 50%. And so just be aware of that and look for that if you have tiered coverage. It's more complicated if you have tiered coverage than if you have composite coverage, obviously.
And a clarifying question on the tax credit. So whatever year I submit for tax credit, I can only do that for 2 years, even though I continue providing insurance. So, not that I don't think we would, but could I provide the health insurance, get the tax credit, and then the next year not provide the health insurance? Since it's not
There's nothing in the tax credit that says you continue the coverage into future years. They really just look at the snapshot of the year that the coverage was provided.
Right.
But as a small employer, you won't get a penalty.
Yeah.
So.
Question?
For employers that have older employees who might be on Medicare, and where Medicare is a primary, and so the insurance through the carrier was significantly lower. In other words, they kept their private insurance in addition to having Medicare,
Medicare was primary, and this wasn't a,
Secondary, yeah.
secondary plan. This was a primary, this was a regular group plan. And so the group plan was, the rate was significantly lower for those older employees because Medicare was paying first. What, they still would be charged 3 times, and all of a sudden the rates will go way up? Is that? Maybe I didn't explain that.
No, what you're talking about is for small, the rules are is that for small groups, and specifically now we're talking about under 20, Medicare's secondary payer law kicks in, or above 20. So if you're a larger group, then Medicare is actually the secondary to your primary insurance, to your private plan. When you're a small enough group, Medicare is a secondary, Medicare is primary payer, and your group, the policy actually truly is acting as a secondary coverage to Medicare, and thus you get a discount because, but if you're a large group in the same situation, you do not get that discount. Only when you're under, and isn't it 20?
Yeah.
It is.
You're talking about starting 2014?
No, this is right now.
So starting in 2014, what happens with the older, the rates for the 67-year-old?
So those rules don't change. And so just as we will offer those rates and those applicable rules for Medicare, if you're secondary, your rates still fall within the 3-to-1. So wherever that rate falls today will continue. So that rule hasn't changed.
I think maybe you're not, I think perhaps the confusion is you're probably, what you're seeing is not necessarily a different premium, but the overall fact that Medicare has paid primary for those groups, so it's a lower net effect on the plan. Is that maybe why you're?
No, I think the premium is lower for the older employee because the carrier has taken that into consideration in rating.
Oh, I see.
They are not going to be paying as much.
I guess, yeah, I don't know.
You do that, Collette?
I didn't know they could do that. Or,
Yeah, absolutely.
You charge less for employees that are over 65
Yeah, with Medicare
when
Prime.
Medicare's
For
primary?
Medicare Prime.
Do you then call that a type of supplemental plan as opposed to?
Secondary.
Well, no, so there's Medicare supplemental plans that you can buy separately, or there are individuals who choose to stay on the regular group coverage plan. So that's an option that individuals have. Your premium is still the same as if you are covered with no Medicare coverage, because it really is you've chosen to stay on that group healthcare coverage. So it looks at it as if you don't have Medicare coverage. It's more like your standalone group coverage that you continue to have as an eligible Medicare person.
So for these individuals, they would probably be well put to start looking into Medicare supplement policy.
Definitely. I think it would definitely be a cost savings for those individuals to look at a Medicare supplement plan.
I wanted to, okay, so let's see, state-based insurance review. So, and this comes to where, like I said, well, I was wrong before. I thought that if our state legislature didn't take action, that you weren't able to create the different rate areas by state, and obviously that wasn't required for the state legislature to take action. It was the insurance commissioner could unilaterally move on that.
The ACA
gave the commissioner the authority to indicate the rating areas that she recommended for the state, and they accepted our recommendation and implemented the rating areas that we recommended using their authority. And then 87 passed, which is dead now. There. No, 87 passed. So for the first time ever, we have a rate review authority.
In Montana for health insurance. We've
Had it for other lines of insurance for many, many years, but not health insurance. Now we are reviewing rates. The bill actually is not effective until July 1. However, we are the effective rate reviewer for 2014 rates, and 2014 rates have already been filed. So we've started looking at them, but we won't pass judgment on them until July 1. But previously, the federal government was reviewing health rates since 2011. So now that's been passed back to the state.
That's good.
Right. So rules that we pass, I mean, potentially we could change the age slope in future years through administrative rule, but we couldn't do it outside of the maximum 3-to-1 spread. Some things that other states have done with that is, for instance, raise the rate on children, and I don't even know if that's necessary in Montana, but.
Okay, any questions on the market regulations at this point, before we get onto the individual requirements? Okay, the individual requirements have a lot of commingling, we'll call it, with the market requirements, because again, this was where we had the largest changes to the insurance market, I would say, is what we're dealing with on the individual side. So first, effective January 1st, 2014, all individuals must be covered under a qualifying health plan or pay a penalty. Lovingly known as the individual mandate, this was the basis for a lot of the legal challenges of the healthcare reform law. Obviously, the Supreme Court made a decision on that. That decision's final, well, as final as things get. Qualifying health plan, this must meet the minimum essential coverage requirements as previously defined. Adults under 30 are actually allowed to buy catastrophic plans with an actuarial value under 60%. The reason being there is that young adults are so good at saving and thinking ahead that they can be very responsible to take that extra risk on there. No, I just think it's funny. I mean, I think it would be most appropriate for the most expensive, oldest adults that have had the most life to live, understand what big financial hits mean. They were probably the ones who would be more appropriate with the catastrophic plan, but the rules are the rules. Some individuals will be exempt from the requirement, so there's exemptions for religious conscience, membership in a healthcare sharing ministry, incarceration, membership in an Indian tribe, and hardship. Hardship is a different, anybody who's heard about the 8% income test and some of those things, that's hardship. There are some people in our society who will not buy medical insurance and who will not be fined for not buying medical insurance because of their income level. That's the basics of it there. Anybody who's real curious about that, we can get you more detail. What I thought was more interesting is what about those folks who are on the other side of that equation, the majority of the United States who is either going to be subject to the requirement or required to pay a penalty. So this was what was going to get everybody to buy medical insurance in the United States, right? The individual mandate. Well, if you look at the fine, the tax penalty in 2014, if you don't buy medical insurance, they're going to charge you $94 a year per adult, or $95 a year per adult, and half of that per child, the greater of that, or 1% of your family income. According to Kaiser Family Foundation survey, cost to insure one person in the United States on a typical employer-sponsored plan is in excess of $4,000 a year. So I have a hard time seeing how charging people $100 to buy a $4,000 product is going to force that decision there. I don't think, and even, oh, well, it gets big in 2016. In 2016, it's $700 per adult, $347.50 per child for 2.5% of family income. Let's say I'm making $100,000 a year, which in Montana is a very nice salary. They can charge me $2,500 a month if I don't buy medical insurance for my family.
A year.
Or, excuse me, a year. Thank you. This is not going to be what makes me buy medical insurance coverage, right? If I'm making $100,000 a year, it's my fear that I'm gonna end up owing some huge medical bills, and that's gonna impact my financial stability of my family. That's what's gonna get me to buy medical insurance, not that they're gonna charge me $2,500. That might help, but again, especially in 2014, this is a pretty benign penalty. Individual subsidy options. Now this is what's going to get people medical insurance coverage. And I'm a true believer that this is what we will see an increase in the insured population in Montana, largely because of subsidies. So these subsidies, there's two parts of the subsidies. One is Medicaid. Montana chose not to, so anybody earning at or below 138% of federal poverty level was supposed to go to Medicaid, no cost to the individual. Montana decided not to expand Medicaid, and so one of the issues, actually we'll just go ahead and start right there. So Montana is not going to extend Medicaid. We come down to our subsidized coverage. So individuals earning over 100% of federal poverty level, but under 400% of federal poverty level, are going to get subsidized medical insurance coverage as long as they don't have other employer-sponsored coverage available. And we'll come back to each one of those items. The big part here is that I'm only eligible for subsidized insurance coverage on the exchange if I make over 100% or more of federal poverty level. If I make under 100% of federal poverty level, I am left out in the cold. I have nothing to help me because I am too poor. I'm too poor to qualify for tax subsidies. Because Montana decided not to take the Medicaid money, we have a substantial issue there that we're struggling how to figure out how to deal with in our state, which is the poorest people in our population who need the most help are actually left completely out of this whole deal, which is, it's a shame that that's the way it's going to end up working out. Now there's some talk about taking that Medicaid money and using it to pay for essentially subsidized programs, as we'll talk about here in a second, but that hasn't been done to my knowledge. Christina, would you like something to add?
No, in the end, that was the specific proposal, that they would do what's called an Arkansas-style expansion, which is using that money to purchase coverage on the exchange for those individuals, but that was also rejected. So it's not something that could happen unless the legislature authorized it, and it did not happen. And also, I would say that if you're over 50 and you did have employees that became Medicaid eligible at 138, you wouldn't have had to pay a penalty for them either.
What is the federal level of poverty?
Excuse me?
Federal level of poverty?
Oh, we will get to that here in a second. For a family of one, it's 11,780, or no, 11,170. So 11,170. That's annual. So there's coverage subsidies, and we'll get to that. That's actually on the next slide. And I believe, Kimberly, were we planning on sending out the slideshow to people afterwards, or posting it?
We'll post it on the website.
Post it on the website. So this information will be available to you. Now, the way I think about a subsidy, I think about my employer. Okay, my employer says, Morgan, I'm going to go ahead and help you buy medical insurance. I'll give you $200 a month to help you buy your medical insurance. That's the way I kind of understand a subsidy. The way this subsidy works is very, very different. If we look back at my graph that goes like this, and then I max out at my 64 based on my age, what they do is they add another tier here, and this is my income. So based upon my income and my relation to federal poverty level, the federal government draws a line and says, that's the most that you can be charged for your medical insurance. We don't care what the insurance costs. This is the most that you can be charged for it. Anything above the line, we pay for. Okay, that's the way this subsidy works. So on this slide, you will be able to see that if you're between 150 and 200% of poverty level, they can charge you between 4 and 6.3% of your household income for your medical insurance coverage.
Modified adjusted gross.
Yeah, modified adjusted gross income. And then the next slide here, I'm just going to click through these so that we can get through them. You will have these, so you can see here's what 100% of federal poverty level is, 11,170 for a family of one. For a family of 5, $27,010. What's 400% of federal poverty level? For a family of one, it's $44,680, and for a family of 5, it's $108,000 a year. What's going on here is they didn't put an income differential between metropolitan and rural areas, and so because of that, this general income threshold rule is going to disproportionately, if you look percentage-wise, benefit Montanans, right? And I always joke with my clients, they're taking money from people in New York and giving it to Montanans, you know? I mean, it's, you know, it's part of kind of what's happened. I understand that if you're in New York, and you're making $108,000 a year with a family of 5, things are probably tough. If you're in Sanders County making $108,000 a year, I don't care how many kids you got, you're doing pretty darn well. It's a different situation that we deal with here in Montana, and so that's why I like to draw attention to this next slide, which is, if you look at what this means to the median Montana family, so the median income in Montana is $44,000 a year. The median household size is 2.35. So that means the median family in Montana is 269% of federal poverty level. And that means that they would qualify for insurance premiums at about $323 a month. Now, we don't really have family levels of 2.35, right? I either got a family of 2 or I got a family of 3, but not 2.35. Well, if I've got a family of 2, this means that I'm going to be that I can be charged up to $351 for my medical insurance. If I've got a family of 3, now I'm adding a person to my medical insurance coverage, right? And the cost of the coverage is going to go up. But what's going to happen to my premium? My premium is going to go down, right? Why? Because I've got a different relationship to federal poverty level. I'm a lower percentage of federal poverty level because I got more people in my family and the same income. So by adding a person to my family, my cost actually goes down. So if we look at what this, and to put this in perspective, according to the Kaiser Family Foundation, the cost for family coverage in the United States is about $13.50 a year, or excuse me, per month for family medical insurance coverage. I can get it for $277 a month under the federally subsidized exchange part here. This is a massive subsidy for the median household in Montana. So you can see, and again, that's median, so that means about half of Montana is going to be better than that level. It's going to have a higher impact than that. Brings me, and then in addition to these, actually, do we have any questions on the premium subsidies here? Or do any of the panelists want to add anything on the basics of the premium subsidies? Okay. Questions? We'll take
Now,
questions
Blue
back.
Cross Blue Shield told me that a household of 2 individual adults, you can't do. So when you're saying 2, is that an adult and a child?
No.
I don't know if I understand the comment.
There must have been a miscommunication about what was really at issue there.
So I'm curious, is a household of 2 considered 2, can it be 2 adults, or is it just an adult and a child?
No, it can be 2 adults and an adult.
It's
So the premium subsidy
is based on the total number of people within your household and your household income. So it uses both of those to compute what your subsidy would be.
Do they have to be married adults?
Well, I think they have to be filing together.
Oh, they do. They
To
have to
get-
be a family.
Yeah, I
Filing
mean,
joint.
so
Yep.
tax filing. So
Tax filing.
to the extent that the federal government does not allow unmarried people, probably who are a man and a woman, I'm guessing, to file a joint tax return, then they would, because this is a federal tax subsidy, it's being paid directly from the IRS to your insurance company.
carrier.
That's if you file married filing joint individuals. Because we're a common law state, you can come legally married.
Well, yeah,
That's correct. There's
In common law, that is
a legal form of
Yeah.
marriage in the state,
Montana.
but it does have to be, it can't be same sex.
If you split up, you actually have to go get a divorce, even if you never really.
No, yes, that's absolutely true. Yeah, it is a legal form of marriage, so it's not impossible.
Another question here?
Yeah, I was just wondering, as far as I understand the household size, let's say you have 2 kids and 2 adults, what if we both have insurance? Do we both get a subsidy, or I guess that's what I kind of.
So you have that.
I've got a slide on the
Okay.
related individuals clause here in just 1 second. If we can hold that one back for a second.
Because it's not only related individuals, so we'll also cover if your group health insurance is deemed affordable and is 60% or higher, then you are not eligible for subsidies on the exchange.
One comment on the adults, if you're unmarried, if you can claim the other adult as a dependent, even though you're not married, you would qualify under this, so it depends. It's important if you have a disabled sister or a disabled spouse or parent.
So on the subsidy, you're telling me subsidies, but how does it physically work then? An individual will go out and get their own insurance and negotiate through the...
You have to buy it on the exchange. The rates are listed there. And they're not, they use a shortcut term, subsidy. That's not what the government calls it. They're called advanceable premium tax credits. You can take it at the end of the year when you file your taxes, like if you're maybe at the 9.5% level, but you can also get it monthly, advanceable, and it goes directly from the IRS to the insurance company. It's a tax credit.
So this exchange, this is why there's been such a dynamic about these exchanges not being ready. My concern about these exchanges being ready, if you look at what this exchange has got to do, it's got to do a lot of stuff. It's got to shop my coverage. It's got to take, come up with my pricing and everything. It's got to come up with my tax credits. It's got to take my part of the money. It's got to take the government's part of the money. It's got to put them together, send them to the insurance carrier. I mean, there's a fair amount. Anybody who's done any, system conversions anytime recently is, there is a lot that this website's got to do. And I'm sorry, there's one person who had a question right here before you. Yeah, there we go.
Just had a question on how long the subsidies will be in effect. Are they, as
It
long as
definitely
they're...
is.
As long as you have that income level. When your income goes up, your subsidy goes down. And there will be an option to report changes in income monthly. So you don't get too much, huh?
Sorry, this is intended to be permanent, not...
It is permanent in the individual market, not for small employers.
As permanent as things get, right.
So if your employer offers a group plan, but you want to go on individual, I don't know why you would, but you buy individually, can you still do that?
But yes, you can buy the coverage. No, you don't get any tax subsidy. If your employer offers you affordable coverage, meaning that the cost of single coverage, the cost for me to have coverage for 1 month is no more than 9.5% of my income, okay, so, or for a year, whatever it is. If my employer offers me, again, that affordable coverage, single coverage cost at or below 9.5% of my income, I do not have any right to subsidize coverage under the exchange as an individual, and nor does my family, and we'll talk a little bit more about the family, but I want to get to the actual, the cost-sharing subsidies that Collette had talked about just a little bit ago. So let's jump onto that. So individual cost-sharing subsidies. So when we talk about these premium subsidies, right? The median Montanan can buy, a family of 3 with the median Montana income can buy insurance coverage at $279 a month. What they get for that is the second lowest cost silver plan. That's a 70% actuarial value. That's what all the pricing methodology is based off of. But if they've got an income threshold at or below below the 250% of federal poverty level, then they actually qualify for subsidized benefits too. Deductible buy-down program. So if you're making $8 an hour, working 40 hours a week, you'll be able to be charged, I think the number is like $48 a month for your medical insurance. And for that $48 a month, they don't give you a 70% actuarial value plan. They give you a 94% actuarial value plan, better than a platinum plan because of your relationship with the federal poverty level. So once we get, again, under 250% of federal poverty level, this program not only subsidizes the cost of the insurance coverage, but also the actual coverage that you receive, so that we don't have people making $8 an hour with a $5,000 deductible still going to bankruptcy court every time they go to the doctor, because that is something that happens right now, that the employer's doing everything they can, they're buying their $5,000 deductible plan, and something happens, well, they make $8 an hour, they can't come up with $5,000, and so we've got the same kind of a write-off issue as we currently have, and then you end up with the garnishment chain, which is that person basically bounces from job to job to avoid garnishments, and I run into a lot of that in my business, unfortunately. So, Collette, did you want to talk more about, can you explain how do you guys know how this is actually gonna work? Because this boggles my mind right here. Am I gonna have like one big national HRA to find out the deductible
They're
with?
not. They're actually, what we're putting into place are different benefit plans that have the reduced
Cost sharing out-of-pockets. So you'll see out on the exchange, there will be plans with higher deductibles and out-of-pocket co-insurance, and then you'll see lower cost plans for people who qualify for cost-sharing subsidies. So you'll purchase a plan that actually has a lower threshold for deductibles and co-insurance.
I don't know if you'll actually, I don't think everyone will see those plans. If the website works as intended, you'll fill in
If
your
you
income
qualify.
first. And if you are under those levels, then it will show you what we call the cost-sharing reduction silver plans, because every carrier that's selling on the exchange had to file cost-sharing reduction plans in those silver tiers at those different, and then they get the money is reimbursed to them by the federal government for the cost sharing at a certain point in time.
That's correct. So the carrier will get the money back from the federal government.
So really, as we've been doing some testing with the federal government, so it is a process. So you're going to put in all of your individual information to determine whether or not you qualify for any tax credits or cost-sharing subsidies.
And as you enter that information,
Those are the plans that will become
available to you on the exchange portal itself.
So it'll kind of do a drill down for you
so that
you know what's available.
And Indians and Alaska Natives have zero cost sharing, up to 300% of federal poverty level. And zero cost sharing means no cost sharing in or out of network. One thing we need to point out about all of this, including the actuarial values and the cost sharing reductions and the maximum out of pocket, it's all based on in-network claims. If you go out of network, you can be subject to higher cost sharing than is allowed under these rules. Same with the preventative benefits. It's zero cost sharing as long as you go in network. If you go out of network, it's not. So this point can't be stressed enough, that when people shop for coverage, whether it's small group or individual, they need to check the network and they need to see how comprehensive it is. The Department of Insurance has additional network adequacy authority now, which we will be exercising to make certain that the plans sold both on and off the exchange have very adequate networks. But when people are shopping, they need to check, the exchange will allow them to check the provider directories to see if their doctors are in network or if there's specialists in network. They will also allow you to check the drug formularies on that plan, because they don't all cover the same drugs. And if you have a high-cost drug, you're going to want to check to see how your insurance company is going to reimburse you for that drug purchase.
Mike, before we take any more questions on this, Mike, could you just kind of discuss a little bit about the concerns of mid-year income changes and how that would pertain to the subsidies and the programs and stuff?
Sure. The way a lot of these subsidies work, they work on, they start out with your prior year's income. And so you may get a subsidy, but then at the end of the year, you look at the current year income and you say, what's my subsidy? Maybe it's $300 a month, maybe it should have been $200 a month, and then you'll have an adjustment on your income tax return that says, okay, I either get a refund of that or now I've got to kick in some more premium. So it's not a set in stone. It's always based off prior years. But then there's an adjustment that happens in the current year. And then one thing that popped into my mind in a question earlier is if you have an employee that says, you know what, my share of the insurance is 10%, and so I'm going to jump off and I'm going to go to the exchange because maybe I can get 20, 25% of my premium is going to be subsidized on the exchange. What you need to tell your employees is, wait a minute, if you run that through, my cafeteria plan, those are pre-tax dollars. And so what you may be missing out on is a tax benefit in lieu of the subsidy. So the subsidy may be 25, 30%, but when you take into payroll taxes, federal and state and local income taxes, you may be losing out on a 30 to 35% bracket. So we've actually had a lot of employers where we've been going through that because they've got, well, I've got so-and-so employee who's going to jump on the exchange and this one's not. But before they do that, they need to be educated because they may be worse off.
Which is one of the reasons why it looks like they're plugging also loopholes of using pre-tax dollars to pay for individual products and stuff. That's something, even though they haven't done the cafeteria plan one yet, it's something that from what I've heard in the marketplace, it's something that's kind of expected, that the intention is that if you're going to the exchange, the employee's paying taxes on their part of the premium that they're using to buy that exchange cover.
Right, so at about 300% of federal poverty level, the tax benefits could start to outweigh the subsidy. The other thing I wanted to say is you can forecast your income. You don't have to just go by what you made last year. You need to estimate your income for the upcoming year, and if you have a change in income, you can report that to the federal government so that your tax credit would be adjusted and you won't owe money back at the end of the year.
Did you define modified adjusted gross? Because that's what we're talking about right here as far as income, right? Isn't that right?
Yeah, modified gross, it's in general terms, is your gross. So if your wage is $100,000, then there's certain things that adjust for it, maybe like an HSA contribution, an IRA contribution, alimony, those type of things to get you down. And then sometimes, depending on what type of modified adjustment, there may be some add backs. Yeah, half the self-employment tax is another one. So if you're paying self-employment tax, you can take half of that and deduct it.
So it doesn't include deductions on your tax returns type thing?
Well, it doesn't include like your mortgage or your kids or taxes. It's before that.
Just one point of clarification on the individual, the cafeteria plan rules that were just mentioned again. Even though the cafeteria plan rules do state that reimbursement of individual health premiums is a qualified benefit, there's clarification that that does not apply to exchange premiums. So that might, yes. Yeah, definitely. So that probably helps with that confusion on that one, because, well, I mean, so it would only apply. I guess that might be only the one benefit, maybe, if not being on the exchange, is the ability to reimburse potentially individual premiums. So.
Can we anticipate, like, the network that you're using being bigger, the same, smaller? Like, I don't insure Montana right now, so how would it be comparable?
So I can speak to Blue Cross and Blue Shield Montana networks, and our networks on exchange are going to be the same as they are off exchange. So there's no change in yours or in terms of anybody else's Blue Cross.
And that's pretty much the way it's being enforced by for all carriers.
I hate to beat this to death, but on the healthcare tax credit that the small businesses get, Insure Montana has to be factored in. So you are probably, and I've looked at the calculation, and most of the ones don't really meet the threshold for getting that full tax credit if you're on Insure Montana. Just
Plus, you can't purchase Insure Montana, you have to do the shop at this point in time.
So we're getting close to the end. I want to make sure to leave the rest of the time for questions, comments, and stuff. But I do have one last piece that I would like to touch on. Todd, Deborah, I bet you won't have any idea what I'm going to talk about now, huh? My little pet peeve. The IRS has issued guidance that said if the single coverage, if coverage for a single person is considered affordable, the entire family loses eligibility for tax subsidies regardless of what that means to their employee's income. So I could have affordable coverage offered to me. I've got an employee that I work with that's in this exact situation right now, where the coverage for them is affordable, $20 a month, but for family coverage, it's most definitely not affordable. They come in at the end of every month and write their employer a check for the rest of their insurance premiums. So they work for free, they work for their insurance, plus they pay the employer to work there to get insurance coverage. That problem does not change with this, because the IRS ruled that, again, it's called the Related Individuals Clause, that affordability for a related individual, so if I, Morgan, am eligible to enroll in my spouse's policy because of my relation to that person, that coverage will be seen as affordable to me if the cost of single coverage is less than 9.5% of my household income. Even if the cost of single coverage. So even if it costs me 100% of my family income to buy coverage for my family, my whole family loses tax credits. If you think that that's not right too, I would encourage, that you write our legislatures and try to engage people in this. I talked to some folks in DC at Baucus's office, and they're concerned about this as well. This was not, I don't think that anybody, by any stretch of the imagination, this wasn't the purpose of the law to facilitate the problem that we already have right now, which is that my employers and the employees of my employers can't afford the family coverage. It's not even the employee-only coverage that's crushing everybody, it's the family coverage. It's what do we do for these people? And this takes something, whereas if you change this one sentence in the regulations, you will have much more of a fix. This changes the whole healthcare reform law from something that I would say from an individual and a small group perspective, something that is pretty tough to work with, to something that, hey, we can actually work with this now. Like, whether it be a large business or a small business. If we're just focusing on providing coverage for the employees now, and we don't have to worry about this family issue, and my low-income families can still go on the exchange, my higher-income families can still buy coverage through the plan, then we've got an acceptable solution. Otherwise, you run into situations where, like a few groups that I'm working with right now, large employers that are considering canceling their group plan, even though it's going to substantially harm the executives. But if you look at the people involved, the people that are providing the main services to the organization, we can't justify keeping the policy in force. It's harming those employees and their families. And so if you think this is not right, like I do, again, here's full disclosure, Morgan's personal opinion. But if you do have strong feelings about that, I would encourage you to contact your legislature, and the IRS, and the President of the United States, because at the end of the day, the IRS is a part of the executive branch. And
Right. It would have to be Congress, not your state legislator. But I wanted to ask Sarah or Kristy a quick question. So they also said recently that they were defining dependent could be defined as children and didn't have to include spouse. Do you think that that does anything to help with the problem that Morgan was talking about?
You can write your
Because if you don't include spouses in as eligible dependents, wouldn't that change, wouldn't it allow that spouse to purchase on the exchange?
Right, but that's just how, that's been in the law.
So if your health plan didn't make the spouse an eligible dependent, then she wouldn't have access to employer health coverage and she could purchase.
But you're excluding all spouses in your organization.
Well,
no, executive spouse and
yeah, I would agree. I would agree that it's not it's not a decision that everyone's going to want to make. But
Oh yeah, I understand that you don't substantially harms the executives in that manner.
No, I think that that's a design choice that I think Morgan alluded to and Christina alluded to, is that there are groups that are considering not offering spouse coverage anymore. And again, the definition of dependent is dependent child to age 26, does not include spouse. So there are some choices being made out there to just cover employees and their dependent children and allow the spouse the opportunity potentially to go to the exchange, because if they are covered and it is affordable minimum value coverage, then that spouse is precluded from getting a subsidy on the exchange. So, yep. Question?
So in the hypothetical, why would a small business that has 5 to 10 employees offer a group plan at all? If you don't offer a group plan, then your individuals are entitled to purchase individually through the exchange, are they not?
You're absolutely right, and this is something where I would encourage you to, there's a lot of thought that goes into this, but you're absolutely right, and that's why I wanted to make sure to touch on this related individuals clause, because particularly that influences my decision as an employer, but there would be some reasons. Number one, why should I not provide coverage? Well, because they can qualify for subsidized coverage on the exchange based upon my income demographic of my people. They're going to be way better off that way, right? We have not talked about, what about the rest of their family? Is their spouse, are they married, and their spouse happens to be, making money that would push them up above the income threshold?
Right.
Or would the spouse, does the spouse have affordable coverage available to them? And so by canceling coverage for this person, you don't really trigger exchange because they can still enroll on the spouse's plan, right? So there's a lot of those kinds of things that make it a very complicated equation when you start to look at the specifics of what it means to cancel coverage and to push people on, not push, but to allow people the subsidies on the exchange, because we look and we say, especially for family coverage, the exchange can do more for these people than I can do for these people, given given the money that my firm has to deal with. And so, yes, you're absolutely right that it's going to take. If you've got a small business, you're going to need to factor some of those things in of what is the best for my employees. What the other challenge of why not offer a group health plan? So you put everybody on the exchange. What happens when you hire somebody mid-year? Right? Well, you can't. You don't have a policy, right? They can go to the exchange. If they're not already in the exchange, they can go to the exchange in October for a January 1 effective date. That's your benefits plan there. And so it would be something where...
That isn't a change of circumstance?
What's that?
A new hire isn't a change of circumstance that would trigger their opportunity?
If you were to hire somebody away from another firm where they currently have benefits, yes. If you were to hire somebody who is currently doesn't have insurance, no, there's no change in status, right? I didn't have insurance, now I don't. Same situation, right? There would be a change in status. So whereas if somebody already had a policy enforced through a current employer, you could take them and yes, that would trigger a qualifying event.
Or they had an individual policy under the mandate to carry coverage.
Yeah, if they had an individual policy under the mandate to carry coverage and they were already on the exchange, then it wouldn't be any different coming to work for you, right? No change for them. But those are just some of the intricacies to keep in mind. Just 1 second, we've got one more.
You're talking about spousal income, household income. I heard something about household income.
Yeah.
Versus your spouse's income.
Household income. Hey, do you want to talk household income, Mike or Kristy or?
Yeah, well, the household income is where it's affordable if it's 9.5% of your household income. And so that means your spouse's income, any other income that you might have from other sources, be it investment or other businesses. Where we say employee, the reason we use employee is that's a safe harbor for determining affordability. Because if you were trying to determine affordability, how many of your employees are going to give you their spouse's income and what other income they're making, that's information they're not going to want to give you or disclose. And so that's the difference. The law is household.
It doesn't have to be the spouse, right?
Right, it could be other income from you. It could be
It could be another person in your household that's not married to you making income. Is that correct?
Taxable. Yeah, I don't know if the regulations would include if you have a roommate. I don't think that's included.
Drill in because I got this question from another client, and it's a very pointed question, or it blew my mind. What if I've got children that are no longer my tax dependents, so they're 24 years old, they're no longer my tax dependents, but they're staying with me, and I've got them on my policy because I can keep them on up to age 26. Do I have to include their income as part of my household income because they're part of my insurance situation, even though they're not actually, they're not one of my tax dependents, but they are still on my medical insurance? Is that part of my taxable income? Does that kind of get to the question?
Well, there's one situation, yeah.
And what is the answer?
The answer is I'd have to look that up. I know. Yeah, I don't think I know. Typically, I would just off the top of my head, if I had to guess, I would say if they're related, could be included, but I don't know that for sure.
Yeah, one more and then we'll...
So basically, if you have insurance through the exchange, and you go get a job, and they offer you insurance, even though the coverage you may have on the exchange is better, if they offer you the coverage that falls under the minimum requirements of the bronze or whatever, you can't keep it and keep getting your subsidy, is that what I'm hearing?
You can keep it for
You won't get the subsidy?
The tax credit.
I thought you didn't get tax credit, was my understanding.
If you've got employer coverage.
Yeah, if you, mid-year, your employer offers you coverage, if you stay on, if you say, no, I don't want your coverage, I got this great policy for $25 a month when I was unemployed through the exchange, and you say no to the employer coverage, at the end of the year, you get the tax bill.
Well, if your income goes up, yeah, and you would lose your eligibility for the next year, but that's a pretty.
Well, what if you're working for somebody that didn't offer insurance, you had it, and then you go to a different job, you're not making a whole lot more money per se.
These are the types of questions you would have to ask your benefits attorney or accountant. But I would say that the IRS recently said that in terms of the employer estimating affordability, you could look at the employee only.
There's some safe harbors in there, absolutely, but yeah, the test for eligibility for subsidy is still on that household. We'll take one more question and we'll close it up.
Well, my question is just right to the point of that is like, holy bananas, right? Where do we go from here? Quite honestly, you guys are obviously smart and educated people and still figuring it out. And I know there are still things to figure out. But what do you recommend? Not that, I mean, none of us probably want a $5,000 legal bill to consult on this. And every insurance agent, God bless them, I'm sure they're getting educated on this as well. But there's got to still be some misinformation out there, but you're drawing from all these different facets to try and make a decision. Where would you recommend, short of having another 4 sessions with you guys and us, how to figure this out in the time we need to? And especially with the website thing not even open up until September, and we got to decide, we got to register or whatever by the 1st of October, right? That's the deadline. Oh, that.
They're giving till the end of March, right?
Yeah.
This contract.
Open enrollment for just the first year on the exchange is October 1st through March 31st, 2014. The later months, and as you're applying later in the month, it doesn't retro back to January 1st. There's some cutoffs in between there, but that's generally the open enrollment for the exchange. But to answer your question, I mean, I would say that, and you're right, I don't think, I mean, up here, there's a lot of expertise up here. But if you contact, your agent, your carrier, your attorney, your tax accountant, I mean, any one of us will research if we don't know the answer. We have different applications that we all tap into with HHS, with CMS. There's lots of different avenues for us to get that information if we don't already have it. So you're right, it's complicated. But I think that's.
And I would say your insurance agent is a good place to start. It's at least a place to coordinate to hub the information. I don't think that, I'm not just throwing a plug in for our organization. I think that that's our job. I think that that's what we do for a living, is to provide advice on this kind of stuff.
But you're going to provide advice on
well, when it's time,
bias advice, I would say.
when it's time to bring in other professionals, absolutely, we don't do tax, we don't do tax advice. I can tell you the basic rules of an HRA, FSA, HSA differences, right? You want to get in and you say, I want to make a plan that does exactly this. And I say, ooh, that's a little outside the scope of a normal. We bring in, some attorneys, or, hey, you want some real specific data about what this means to your plan. We bring in your carrier and we have them talk. But I would rely heavily on your agents. Me personally, and again, being an agent, I know that I'm just signing all of us up for a lot more work than, but it's part of the deal. And I truly believe that they're a good point of contact to be kind of a spearhead for you. Not that your agent is going to have all the answers, not that your agent is going to be a specialist in all of this stuff, but your agent should know where to go to get these pieces of information from the insurance commissioner's office and the attorney's firms and stuff. And I think that my clients right now are relying heavily on our firm to help them through just a lot of the coordination of this information.
Something I would say too is just try to stay informed. All of the governmental websites are trying to keep everybody informed. So if you go on the HHS website, or you go to the healthcare.gov website, or you go to the CSI website, you can actually get quite a bit of information that is general public information, and it's helpful so that you can stay on top of the issues and you'll recognize some of the terms when they come up, like you'll know what a bronze plan is. The other tip is to check for notices. That's kind of your low-hanging fruit, so to speak. That's what you really need to be watching for. If you have a notice requirement, stay on it, watch for it. If you see a notice come out, look at it, pull it up, try to understand it, and then call professionals to ask questions about it. But you can see notices are being posted and model notices are out there.
I hate to cut it off, but we're 10 minutes over already, and so anybody with additional questions for me or any of the panelists, did you have a quick one?
I was at the beginning of the session, I think you alluded to some handouts that were going to be provided by the chamber or the company or something. Are we going to get anything as a result of this session, or any handouts or flyers? Or?
Yeah, the slideshow that we went through is going to be posted on the chamber website if you want that information. There's some information up here on the SHOP program, and then there's also some information up here on how to test to see if you're a large or a small employer. I would encourage you to, go ahead, grab the slideshow, print it out, and if you have questions, contact information for all of us are up here. The other thing, if you have questions that haven't been gotten to, Kimberly has volunteered to go ahead and collect those questions and send them to us, and we'll make sure that you guys get an answer. So, thanks a lot for coming, and sorry we went over.
Thank you.